Damien Valente owned half the city's underground, but he'd never seen power like this, the kind that made a woman flinch at a shadow. Standing in a sterile office lobby, disguised in an off-the-rack suit that itched, he watched the receptionist smile at visitors while cradling her left arm like it might shatter. When their eyes met, she whispered 4 words that stopped him cold. "Please don't tell anyone." He'd come hunting for a thief stealing office supplies. Instead, he'd found something far more dangerous, a predator who thought he was untouchable. And Damien Valente was about to teach him otherwise. Before we begin, if you enjoy this story, please hit the like button and comment with your city so I can see how far this tale travels. Now, let's dive in. The problem with wearing a cheap suit, Damien Valente decided, was that the fabric had no memory. It creased wrong, bunched at the shoulders, and made him look exactly like what he was pretending to be. A mid-level corporate nobody conducting routine inventory audits for building management. Which was perfect, because the last thing he needed was recognition. He stood in the marble lobby of the Hartwell Tower at 8:47 on a Tuesday morning, holding a clipboard that contained absolutely nothing useful, watching the rhythm of a place that thought it knew order. Lawyers in crisp suits, tech workers clutching oversized coffee cups, administrative assistants moving with the efficient invisibility of people who kept everything running but received none of the credit. Damien had built an empire on reading rooms. You learned fast in his world. The real power wasn't always the person with the corner office. It was the one who controlled the flow of information, who saw everything, who everyone underestimated. Like the woman behind the front desk. She'd been there when he walked in, offering a professional smile that didn't quite reach her eyes, directing him to sign the visitor log with hands that moved just a fraction too carefully. Early 30s, he estimated. Dark hair pulled back in a neat bun, features that would be striking if they weren't carefully composed into pleasantness. The kind of face that had learned to be forgettable. Her nameplate read, Lena Hart, Reception Services. Damien had barely noticed her at first. He was here because his finance guy had flagged unusual inventory discrepancies in one of the buildings his organization consulted for, which was code for buildings that paid protection money in exchange for certain business advantages. Small stuff, office supplies, petty cash, the kind of theft that suggested an inside job by someone who thought they were clever. He'd come to observe, to see who moved wrong, who avoided eye contact, who suddenly had expensive habits on a minimum wage salary. But then Lena Hart had reached for a visitor badge, and her left sleeve had pulled back just enough. The bruise was dark purple, almost black at the center, spreading across her forearm in a pattern that made his jaw tighten. Not a bruise from bumping into furniture, a grip bruise. 4 distinct finger marks and a thumb impression, like someone had grabbed her hard enough to leave their signature in her skin. She'd noticed him noticing. Her eyes had gone wide for just a fraction of a second before the pleasant mask slammed back down. "Can I help you with anything else?" she'd asked, voice perfectly modulated. "No," Damien had said, taking his visitor badge. "You've been very helpful." He'd meant to walk away, meant to focus on the inventory audit, identify the thief, handle it quietly, move on. But something about the way she'd pulled her sleeve down, not panicked, but practiced, like she'd done it 1,000 times, had lodged in his chest like a splinter. Now, 3 hours later, he was back. The lobby had thinned out, the morning rush replaced by a quieter flow of lunch-hour traffic. Lena was still at her post, answering phones with mechanical efficiency, directing deliveries, managing the constant small crises that came with being the first face everyone saw. Damien positioned himself near the building directory, close enough to observe without being obvious. He'd pulled this kind of surveillance 100 times, watching for patterns, for tells, for the moment when someone's guard dropped. Lena's never did. Even when she thought no one was looking, her posture stayed perfect. Shoulders back, spine straight, smile ready. But there were micro-expressions, tiny fractures in the facade. The way she rubbed her left forearm absently. The slight wince when she reached for the phone. The way her eyes tracked toward the elevators every time the doors opened, like she was bracing for something. At 12:47, the elevator in the center of the bank opened, and Damien understood what. The man who stepped out was tall, late 40s, with the kind of athletic build that came from expensive gym memberships and ego, His suit was tailored, his watch was Swiss, and he moved with the confidence of someone who'd never been told no in his life. Grant Harlow, building manager. Damien had reviewed his file this morning, Columbia MBA, 15 years in commercial property management, reputation for running a tight ship. The file hadn't mentioned the way Lena's entire body went rigid when she saw him. "Lena," Harlow said, his voice carrying across the lobby with casual authority. "My office, 5 minutes." It wasn't a request, it was a summons. "Yes, Mr.
Harlow," Lena said, her voice steady. Too steady. The kind of steady that came from practice, from knowing that any other response would be worse. Harlow didn't wait for acknowledgement. He was already walking toward the security office, expecting obedience, receiving it. Damien watched Lena's hands. They'd started trembling, just slightly, before she pressed them flat against the desk. She took a slow breath, composed herself, then stood and walked toward the elevators with the careful deliberation of someone approaching an execution. Something cold settled in Damien's chest. He knew predators, had been one himself in certain contexts, had learned to spot them across a crowded room, to recognize the particular satisfaction they took in others' fear. Grant Harlow was a predator, and Lena Hart was his prey. Damien stayed in the lobby, watching the elevator numbers climb. 10th floor, Harlow's executive office. The doors closed on Lena's carefully blank expression, and Damien pulled out his phone. "Marco," he said when his head of security answered. "I need everything on Grant Harlow. Employment history, financial records, personal life, parking tickets, everything. And I need security access to the Hartwell Tower, camera feeds, elevator logs, access records for the past 6 months." "The building manager?" Marco's voice held careful neutrality. He'd learned not to question Damien's instincts. "What level of detail?" "The kind that would stand up in court," Damien said quietly. There was a pause. "Got it. How fast?" "Yesterday. I'll have preliminary by tonight, full workup by morning." Damien ended the call and positioned himself where he could see the elevators. He told himself he was being paranoid, that he was seeing threats where there might just be a difficult boss and a nervous employee, that he should focus on the actual job he'd come here to do. But he'd built his reputation on trusting his gut, and his gut was screaming that something was very wrong. 23 minutes later, the elevator opened. Lena stepped out, and Damien felt his hands clench. She looked diminished. Her eyes were red-rimmed, her professional composure fractured just enough to show the exhaustion underneath. She moved carefully, like someone testing whether the ground would hold, and when she sat down at her desk, she had to steady herself with both hands. Then she noticed him watching. Their eyes met across the lobby, and for just a second, Damien saw it. The desperate hope that someone, anyone, might see what was happening to her. Followed immediately by resignation, by the certainty that no one would, that no one ever did. She looked away first, pulling her armor back on, becoming invisible again. Damien walked toward the desk. He didn't have a plan, didn't know what he was going to say. He just knew that walking away was no longer an option. "Excuse me," he said, keeping his voice gentle. "I think I signed in wrong this morning. Could you help me fix it?" It was a transparent excuse. They both knew it. Lena's hands trembled as she pulled up the visitor log. "Of course. What name?" "David Stern," Damien said, using the alias on his fake credentials. You seem upset. Are you okay?" The question hung in the air between them. Damien watched her face, saw the war happening behind her eyes. The desperate want to say no, to tell someone, to ask for help. And the terror that came with that want, the knowledge that speaking up meant consequences she couldn't afford. "I'm fine," she said finally, the words automatic. "Just a headache. What time did you sign in this morning?" Damien let her redirect. He gave her an out, let her maintain the fiction of normalcy. But he also pulled a business card from his wallet, one of the generic ones he kept for situations like this, just a name and a number, nothing that would identify who he really was. "If you ever need anything," he said quietly, setting it on the desk beside her keyboard. "A reference, a job lead, someone to talk to, whatever. That number reaches me directly." Lena stared at the card like it might bite her. I don't need..." "Keep it anyway," Damien said. just in case. He walked away before she could refuse, before the moment could become something that would put her in more danger, but he felt her eyes on his back, felt the weight of everything she wasn't saying. As he stepped out into the cold November air, his phone buzzed. Marco. Preliminary on Harlow. You're going to want to see this. 3 harassment complaints in the past 8 years, all resolved with NDAs and settlement payments. 2 more that were filed and then mysteriously withdrawn. Pattern suggests someone with protection and practice. Damien's jaw tightened. He pulled up the building's ownership records, following the chain of shell companies and holding corporations until he found what he was looking for. The Hartwell Tower was owned by Meridian Properties Group, which had contracted certain security consulting services from one of his legitimate business fronts 2 years ago, which meant, technically, he had both access and authority to investigate internal security concerns. He called Marco back. Change of plans. I'm going to need more than surveillance. I want a full operational profile, Harlow's routine, his associates, his vulnerabilities. And I want to know everything about Lena Hart. Family, finances, why she's still working for someone who's hurting her. You're going active on this? Marco's tone was carefully neutral, but Damien could hear the curiosity underneath. Damien Valente didn't usually involve himself in civilian problems. He solved problems that threatened his organization, eliminated competition, protected his interests. This was none of those things. Yeah, Damien said. I'm going active. Oh. The next morning, Damien returned to the Hartwell Tower at 7:15, early enough to watch the building wake up. He'd spent the night reviewing Marco's preliminary report, and what he'd found had turned his instincts into certainty. Grant Harlow was a predator with a pattern. Every job he'd held, there were whispers, women who'd quit suddenly, complaints that evaporated, a trail of silence purchased with money and fear. He was careful. Never anyone senior enough to have real power, never anyone who could afford a protracted legal fight. He chose women who were isolated, who needed the job, who had something to lose. Women like Lena Hart. Marco's research on Lena had been thorough but respectful, focusing on public records and financial data. 29 years old, bachelor's degree from a state school, graduated with honors despite working full-time. No criminal record, no red flags. Rented a modest apartment in a questionable neighborhood. Paid her bills on time, but lived paycheck to paycheck. And she had a younger brother, Tyler Hart, age 23, who'd been arrested 6 months ago for possession with intent to distribute. The charges had been mysteriously reduced to simple possession, and Tyler had gotten probation instead of prison time. That was the leverage. Damien would bet everything he owned on it. Lena arrived at 7:45, using a staff entrance at the back of the building. Damien watched from his car, parked with a clear view of both entrances. She moved with purpose, head down, avoiding eye contact even though the street was nearly empty. She wore long sleeves despite the building's overheated interior, and she carried herself with the careful control of someone in chronic pain. Damien waited until 8:30 before entering through the main lobby. Lena was at her post, perfect and professional, greeting the morning rush with practiced efficiency. He signed in, took his visitor badge, and settled into his surveillance routine. He told the building's property management company, which answered to him through a chain of shell corporations they didn't realize existed, that he was conducting a comprehensive security audit. It gave him permission to be anywhere, to ask questions, to observe. What he observed made his blood pressure rise. At 9:15, Grant Harlow emerged from the elevator and stopped at Lena's desk. Coffee. Black. And I need the Henderson contracts from 2022. You have 15 minutes. He didn't say please, didn't acknowledge her as human, just gave orders and walked away. Lena's jaw tightened, but she stood and headed for the executive break room without argument. Damien followed at a discreet distance, watching as she prepared Harlow's coffee with meticulous care. Her hands were steady, professional, but when she thought no one was looking, she closed her eyes and took a breath that looked like it hurt. At 11:30, Harlow paged her to his office. She went, spine straight, face blank. She came back 27 minutes later with fresh bruises forming on her wrist and tears she'd already wiped away. Damien felt something dark and cold settle in his chest. He'd done terrible things in his life, had hurt people, destroyed lives, made choices he couldn't take back. He told himself it was necessary, that the world he operated in demanded ruthlessness. But this?
This was different. This was a man with institutional power brutalizing someone who had none. This was cruelty for its own sake, control for the pleasure of control. This was everything Damien had learned to despise in the men who thought power meant you could do whatever you wanted to, whoever you wanted. He made a decision. The thief stealing office supplies could wait. This couldn't. That night, Damien sat in his penthouse office with Marco and Elena Ruiz, his information specialist, a former federal analyst who'd gotten tired of watching criminals walk free on technicalities and decided to work for someone who actually got results. "Tell me everything," Damien said. Elena pulled up a presentation on the main screen, her expression grim. Grant Harlow, 46. Divorced, no kids, MBA from Columbia, but his career trajectory is interesting. He gets hired, performance is stellar for about 2 years, then there's always some kind of restructuring, and he moves to a new company. I pulled deeper, found sealed settlements in 3 cases, NDAs in 5 more. Sexual harassment, Damien asked. Harassment, assault, coercion. The pattern is consistent. He targets women in subordinate positions, usually administrative or service roles. He escalates gradually, tests boundaries, isolates his victims. Then he finds leverage. Elena's voice was clinical, but her eyes were hard. The women who fought back got crushed, lost their jobs, their references, their reputations. The ones who stayed quiet got trapped. And Lena? Elena pulled up a new file. Lena Marie Hart. Smart as hell, based on her academic record. Should have been able to do a lot more than reception work, but she's been supporting her brother since their parents died in a car accident 8 years ago. Tyler Hart, her younger brother, got into trouble with drugs. Started dealing to pay his tuition. Got arrested 6 months ago. Let me guess, Damien said. The charges got reduced right around the time Harlow's harassment escalated. Exactly. Elena pulled up the court documents. Public defender was pushing for a plea deal that would have meant 3 to 5 years. Suddenly, a high-powered defense attorney shows up, charges get reduced to simple possession, Tyler gets probation. The attorney's fees? Paid by an anonymous benefactor through a legal trust. Marco leaned forward. Harlow. Has to be, Elena confirmed. I can't prove it directly. The trust is buried under enough legal protections that we'd need a federal investigation to crack it, but the timing matches perfectly. Tyler's charges get reduced, and 2 weeks later, security logs show Lena started getting called to Harlow's office multiple times a week. Damien felt his hands curl into fists. He bought her brother's freedom and made her the payment. It's elegant in a sick way, Elena said. He's got leverage that makes her afraid to run, afraid to fight back, afraid to even tell anyone. If she reports him, he can claim she's making it up out of spite. And Tyler's sitting on probation, 1 violation, and he goes away for years. Surveillance? Damien asked Marco. I've pulled 6 months of security footage from the building. It's extensive. Marco's voice was carefully controlled. Harlow calls her to his office 2 to 4 times a week. Average visit duration is 20 to 40 minutes. She comes back visibly distressed in approximately 70% of encounters. Physical signs of injury visible in the footage include bruising, limping, favoring certain limbs, all consistent with assault. Is it enough for the police? Marco and Elena exchanged glances. Honestly, Elena said, maybe, but Harlow's got connections. The property management company he works for has political ties. He knows how to work the system. Even if we handed this to the police tomorrow, it'd be her word against his. He'd claim it was all consensual, that she's lying for money or revenge. And with Tyler's record, they'd destroy her credibility, Damien finished. Yeah. Damien stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city he'd spent 20 years learning to control. He'd built his power by being smarter, more ruthless, more willing to do what others wouldn't. He'd crushed competitors, eliminated threats, made examples of people who crossed him. But this required something different. This required precision, because one wrong move and Lena would pay the price. I need options, he said. Legal, illegal, I don't care. I want every possible way to end this without putting Lena at risk. Elena pulled up a new document. I've been working on that. Option 1. We gather enough evidence to make a criminal case airtight, then hand it to the DA's office with political pressure to actually prosecute. Pros. It's legal, and permanent. Cons. It's slow. Lena would have to testify, and there's always a chance Harlow walks. Next. Option 2. We destroy him financially and professionally. Tank his career, burn his reputation, make him unemployable, force him out of Lena's life through economic pressure. Pros. We can do it fast and without Lena's cooperation. Cons. It's not permanent. He could rebuild, and it doesn't address the criminal behavior. Next. Marco spoke up. Option 3. We handle it our way. Harlow has an accident, something permanent. Clean, untraceable, problem solved. There was a long silence. Damien had given that order before, more times than he could count. It was efficient, final, and in his world perfectly acceptable. But this wasn't his world. This was Lena's world, a world where justice was supposed to mean something, where violence was supposed to have consequences, where the law was supposed to protect people like her. No, Damien said finally. Not yet. If it comes to that, I'll make the call, but I want to try it clean first. Elena nodded. Then we need Lena's cooperation. We need her to trust us enough to help build the case. She won't, Damien said. She's terrified, and she has no reason to trust me. So we give her one, Marco said. We handle Tyler first, remove the leverage. Damien turned back to face them. Explain. Marco pulled up Tyler Hart's probation records. The kid's clean, hasn't violated probation, passed every drug test, been attending his check-ins. The charges against him were bullshit to begin with. He was selling to pay for school, not running a trafficking operation. If we could prove the arrest was compromised or coerced, can we? Maybe. I've got a contact in the department who owes me a favor. I can pull the arrest records, interview transcripts, see if there's anything hinky in the investigation. Do it, Damien said. And Elena, I want you to find out who actually paid Tyler's legal fees. We need proof that Harlow bought his way into Lena's life. That's going to take time, Elena warned. Those trusts are designed to be opaque. Then use whatever resources you need. Buy information, hack databases, bribe lawyers. I don't care, I want that proof. Elena smiled grimly. Now you're speaking my language. And me? Damien asked. What do I do? You, Marco said. Keep watching. Keep building the timeline. And when the time comes, you're the one who has to convince Lena to trust us. Great, Damien said. No pressure. For the next 2 weeks, Damien Valente became David Stern, boring security consultant. He showed up every morning at 7:30, signed in with Lena, conducted his audit with methodical thoroughness. He interviewed maintenance staff about inventory procedures. He reviewed access logs. He became part of the building's routine, invisible in his cheap suit and forgettable face. And he watched. He watched Grant Harlow summon Lena to his office, watched her return with fresh damage. He documented every interaction, every instance of public humiliation, every moment when Harlow's mask slipped and the cruelty showed through. He watched Lena hold it together with willpower that made his chest ache. Watched her smile at visitors while her hands shook. Watched her deflect concern with practiced ease. Watched her become invisible, erasing herself to survive. He also watched her kindness, the way she helped confused elderly visitors find their way. The patience she showed with delivery drivers who didn't speak English well. The genuine warmth when she talked about her brother during lunch breaks. How proud she was that he was back in school. How hard he was working to turn his life around. Everything Harlow had stolen from her crystallized in those moments. Not just her safety or her dignity, but her ability to build a life beyond survival. Her dreams, her future. Her belief that being good and working hard meant something. On day 12, Damien was reviewing security logs in a borrowed office when his phone buzzed. Marco. Got something. Tyler's arrest. The confidential informant was compensated through a third party, same legal trust that paid his defense fees. Someone set the kid up and then rescued him. Elena. Found the money trail. Harlow made a $75K withdrawal from a personal investment account 4 days before Tyler's attorney appeared. Can't prove direct transfer because of the trust, but the timing and amount match. He bought her brother's freedom and used it as a leash.
Damien stared at the messages, feeling cold rage settle in his bones. It was worse than he'd thought. Harlow hadn't just exploited an existing situation, he'd created it, had deliberately destroyed a young man's life to get leverage over his sister. Damien. Do we have enough? Elena. Enough to ruin him professionally and tie him up in investigations. Enough to get Tyler's record expunged if we can prove the arrest was compromised. But for criminal charges? We need Lena's testimony. Marco. Or we handle it our way. Damien considered it. One phone call. Harlow would disappear neatly and permanently. No trial, no testimony, no risk to Lena. Clean. But also meaningless. Because there would be another Grant Harlow, another building, another woman trapped by fear and silence. And Lena would never know she could have fought back and won. Damien. Set up a meeting. Private location. I need to talk to Lena. Marco. How are you going to convince her to trust you? Damien. By showing her she's not alone anymore. Watch. The opportunity came on a Wednesday afternoon. Damien was at his usual post, observing the lobby, when Grant Harlow stepped out of the elevator looking particularly pleased with himself. He stopped at Lena's desk, leaned in close enough to make her flinch, and said something Damien couldn't hear. Whatever it was made Lena's face go pale. My office, Harlow said, loud enough for Damien to catch. 10 minutes. Don't be late. He walked away, leaving Lena frozen at her desk. Damien watched her hands tremble as she tried to compose herself. Watched her take a breath, then another, fighting for control. Watched her reach for her phone, then stop, like she'd started to call for help but remembered there was no one to call. That's when Damien made his decision. He walked to her desk, leaned in close, and spoke quietly. You don't have to go up there. Lena's eyes snapped to his, wide with shock. What? You don't have to go, Damien repeated. I know what he's doing to you. I know about Tyler, about the arrest, about how Harlow set it all up, and I can prove it. The color drained from Lena's face. I don't know what you're talking about. Yes, you do. Damien kept his voice gentle but firm. And you're terrified that if you admit it, something worse will happen. But Lena, I promise you, it's already as bad as it's going to get, and I can make it stop. Who are you? Her voice was barely a whisper. Someone who can help. If you'll let me. Damien pulled a folder from his bag, just the executive summary, enough to show her he was serious. Tomorrow morning, 6 a.m., there's a coffee shop 3 blocks from here. Meet me there. I'll show you everything I have, and you can decide what to do with it. Your choice. Your decision. But please, Lena, don't go up to his office today. He set the folder on her desk and walked away before she could respond, before Harlow's 10 minutes were up. Behind him, he heard her phone ring, heard her answer it with a voice that shook. Mr. Harlow? I'm so sorry, but I'm not feeling well. I think I need to go home. Yes, I understand. Tomorrow. I promise. Damien didn't look back, but as he pushed through the lobby doors into the cold November air, he allowed himself the smallest smile. She'd made a choice, a small one, but hers. Tomorrow, he'd give her the tools to make a bigger one, and Grant Harlow's perfect little kingdom was about to come crashing down. The coffee shop Damien had chosen was deliberately unremarkable, a small, independent place that opened early for the downtown crowd, with enough ambient noise to mask conversation and enough exits that Lena could leave if she felt unsafe. He arrived at 5:45, ordered 2 coffees, and settled into a corner booth where he could watch the door. At 6:03, Lena walked in. She looked exhausted, like she hadn't slept. Her hair was pulled back in a severe bun, and she wore sunglasses despite the gray morning light. When she spotted him, she hesitated, her body language screaming that every instinct was telling her to run. Damien didn't move, didn't pressure her, just waited, letting her make the choice. Finally, she crossed the small space and slid into the booth across from him, her movements careful and controlled. I shouldn't be here, she said quietly. Probably not, Damien agreed. He pushed one of the coffees toward her. But you came anyway. That takes courage. Well, Lena wrapped her hands around the cup but didn't drink. You said you know about Tyler, about what happened. I do. Damien pulled out a tablet, opened the file Elena had prepared. Your brother was arrested 6 months ago on distribution charges.
The case against him was weak, entrapment, basically, but his public defender was pushing for a plea that would have meant prison time. Then suddenly, a high-powered defense attorney shows up. The charges get reduced to simple possession, and Tyler walks with probation. Lena's face had gone very still. Someone helped him. Someone who believed he deserved a second chance. Someone who paid $75,000 for that second chance, Damien said gently, and then made you pay it back. Her hands tightened on the coffee cup. I don't know what you mean. Lena, Damien kept his voice soft. I've been watching for 2 weeks. I've seen what Harlow does to you. I've documented it. And I've traced the money that paid for Tyler's attorney back to Grant Harlow's personal accounts. The color drained from her face. That's not... He told me it was anonymous, a legal charity that helps people who can't afford... He lied. Damien turned the tablet so she could see the financial records, the timeline, the pattern. He set up your brother's arrest through a paid informant. Then he swooped in to save him. And he's been using that debt to control you ever since. Lena stared at the screen, her breathing shallow. Damien watched emotions flash across her face. Disbelief, horror, recognition, rage. When she finally looked up, tears were streaming down her cheeks. Why? Her voice cracked. Why would someone do that? Because he could, Damien said quietly. Because he's done it before, and because he knew you'd do anything to protect your brother. Lena pulled off her sunglasses with shaking hands, revealing a fresh bruise along her cheekbone that makeup hadn't quite covered. If I tell anyone, he'll have Tyler's probation revoked. He told me he has connections in the DA's office, that one phone call and Tyler goes away for years. I can't let that happen. He's bluffing, Damien said. Or at least he's exaggerating his influence. I've had my people look into it. Tyler's probation is solid. He hasn't violated any terms. He's passed every drug test, attended every meeting. There's no legitimate reason to revoke it. But Harlow says a lot of things. Most of them are designed to keep you scared and compliant. Damien leaned forward. Lena, I need you to understand something. Everything he's told you about Tyler being in danger, that's manipulation. The real danger is to Harlow himself. Because if you speak up, if you fight back, his whole carefully constructed system falls apart. Lena shook her head, overwhelmed. I don't understand. Who are you? Why do you care about any of this? It was a fair question. Damien had been asking himself the same thing for 2 weeks. My name isn't David Stern, he said carefully, and I'm not really here to audit inventory systems. I came to this building to investigate some missing office supplies. And instead I saw you flinch when Harlow walked into a room. I saw bruises you tried to hide, and I couldn't walk away from that. But why? Lena pressed. People walk away all the time. Everyone in that building sees what he does to me, and no one says anything. Why would a stranger care? Damien considered how much truth to give her. She deserved honesty, but the full truth, that he was a crime boss with the resources of a small army, might terrify her more than it helped. Let's just say I have experience with people who abuse power, he said finally, and I have the resources to stop them, which is what I'm offering you. Not charity, not rescue, tools, information, options. What you do with them is entirely your choice. Lena looked down at the tablet again, at the evidence of Harlow's systematic manipulation. What kind of options? That depends on what you want, Damien said. If you want to disappear, I can make that happen. New city, new identity, new start for both you and Tyler. If you want to file a police report, I have evidence that will support your testimony and lawyers who will represent you for free. If you want to destroy Harlow professionally without going through the criminal justice system, I can do that too. And if I want all of it? Lena's voice was quiet, but there was steel underneath. If I want him arrested, prosecuted, and destroyed so thoroughly that he can never do this to anyone else? Damien smiled grimly. Then we're going to need more than one meeting, because that kind of justice takes time and strategy. Are you willing to do that? To fight back? Even though it's going to be hard and scary? Lena was quiet for a long moment, staring at her reflection in the dark coffee. When she finally spoke, her voice was steady. My whole life, I've tried to be invisible. Be good, work hard, don't make trouble. I thought if I just kept my head down and did what I was supposed to, things would be okay. But they're not okay. And they're never going to be okay unless I do something about it. She looked up, meeting Damien's eyes directly for the first time. So yes, I want to fight back. Tell me what I need to do. Relief and respect flooded through Damien in equal measure. First thing, you can't go back to work today. Call in sick, take emergency leave, whatever you need to do. Harlow's going to be angry that you dodged him yesterday, and he'll escalate. I know. Lena's jaw tightened. But if I don't show up, if I change my routine, he'll know something's wrong. He watches everything I do,
which is exactly why we need to be smart about this. Damien pulled up a calendar on the tablet. Today is Wednesday. Tomorrow you call your supervisor, not Harlow, the actual HR manager, and tell her you need to use your accumulated sick leave for a family emergency. Tyler can back up that story if needed. That gives us at least a week, maybe 2, to build the case before Harlow gets suspicious. He'll call me, Lena said. He always calls when I'm not there. Let him. You're sick. You're dealing with a family crisis. You're not available. Every message he leaves, every text he sends, that's evidence of his obsession and control. Damien made a note. Do you have your phone with you? Lena pulled it out, a basic smartphone with a cracked screen. Damien gestured for it, and when she hesitated, he understood. I'm not going to bug it or track you, he said quietly. I'm going to show you how to save evidence. Every text, every voicemail, every email Harlow sends you from now on needs to be preserved and backed up. Can I show you? Slowly, Lena handed over the phone. Damien spent the next 10 minutes walking her through cloud backup systems, showing her how to save messages in multiple locations, how to take screenshots with timestamps. Why didn't anyone ever tell me this before? Lena asked, watching him work. Because most people don't think about documentation until it's too late, Damien said. But in harassment cases, paper trail is everything. The more evidence we have that shows a pattern of behavior, the harder it is for Harlow to claim this is all a misunderstanding. He handed back the phone. Now, I need to ask you some hard questions, and you don't have to answer anything you're not comfortable with. But the more I know, the better I can help you. Okay? Lena nodded, her expression wary but determined. How long has this been going on? 6 months, Lena said quietly. Almost exactly. Tyler's charges got reduced in May. 2 weeks later, Harlow called me into his office and told me he knew about Tyler, knew what he'd done for me, and that I owed him loyalty and discretion in exchange for his continued support. Did he specify what that loyalty meant? Lena's hands tightened around her coffee cup. At first, it was just errands. Personal stuff. Picking up his dry cleaning, getting his car detailed, running to the pharmacy. Things that weren't in my job description but weren't technically illegal. Then he started keeping me late, making me work through lunch, finding reasons to criticize everything I did. When did it become physical? The question hung heavy in the air. Lena's eyes dropped to the table, and Damien could see her fighting the urge to shut down, to retreat into the safety of silence. You don't have to answer that, he said gently. Not right now. But eventually, if we're going to prosecute him, you'll need to give a formal statement. It's going to be hard, but I promise you won't be alone. It was about 3 months ago, Lena said suddenly, the words spilling out like she needed to say them before she lost her nerve. He grabbed my wrist when I was leaving his office, told me I was being disrespectful. Left bruises. I thought it was a one-time thing, that he'd lost his temper. But then it happened again and again. Each time a little worse. Her voice had gone flat, clinical, like she was talking about someone else's trauma. Last week She stopped, swallowed hard. He pushed me against the wall in his office. Said he was tired of being patient with me. That I needed to understand who was in charge. Damien felt his jaw clench. Did he? No, Lena said quickly. Not that. But he made it clear that he could. That any time he wanted, he could do whatever he wanted, and no one would believe me if I tried to stop him. I believe you, Damien said quietly, and I'm going to make sure everyone else does too. Lena looked up at him with hollow eyes. How? It's his word against mine. He's a respected building manager with an MBA and connections. I'm just a receptionist with a criminal brother and a history of keeping my mouth shut. You're a survivor, Damien corrected, who's been systematically abused by someone in a position of power, and you're not alone. My team has found at least 5 other women who've worked for Harlow over the years. Women who filed complaints that got buried, who took settlements and signed NDAs, who quit rather than keep fighting. Lena's eyes widened. 5? At least. Probably more who never came forward at all. Damien pulled up another file. If we can find them, convince them to go on record, we can show a pattern of predatory behavior that spans years. That's not your word against his. That's a mountain of corroborating evidence. But they signed NDAs, Lena said. Doesn't that mean they can't talk? NDAs can be challenged, especially in criminal cases. And there are ways to share information without technically violating the agreement. Damien made a note. That's what my legal team is working on now, building a case that's too big to ignore, too documented to dismiss. Lena was quiet, processing. Then, you have a legal team, and investigators, and resources to track financial records through multiple shell companies. She studied his face. You're not just some concerned citizen, are you? No, Damien admitted. I'm not, but I'm not your enemy either. And right now, I'm the best chance you've got. What do you want in return? It was a smart question. Damien respected her for asking it. Nothing, he said. No favors, no obligations, no strings attached. When this is over, you walk away and never have to see me again if that's what you want. People don't help for nothing, Lena said flatly. Everyone wants something. You're right, Damien agreed. I do want something. I want to watch Grant Harlow's face when he realizes he's not untouchable. I want him to understand that the women he's been hurting for years aren't as powerless as he thought. And I want to know that the next woman he might have targeted is safe because we stopped him. That's what I want. Lena searched his face, looking for the lie, the angle, the trap. Damien let her look. He'd learned a long time ago that you couldn't fake sincerity. Either it was there or it wasn't. Finally, she nodded slowly. Okay, I'll trust you, for now, but if you're lying, if this is some kind of setup, then you'll be exactly where you are now, Damien said. No worse off. But I'm not lying, Lena. I promise you that. He spent the next hour laying out the plan, how they'd use the sick leave to buy time, how his team would continue gathering evidence while Lena stayed safely away from Harlow, how they'd coordinate with a DA who specialized in workplace harassment cases and wasn't in Harlow's pocket, how they'd prepare her for what came next, the interviews, the statements, the inevitable media attention if the case went public. It's going to get ugly, Damien warned. Harlow will hire expensive lawyers who'll try to destroy your credibility. They'll bring up Tyler's arrest, question why you didn't report earlier, suggest you're doing this for money. You need to be prepared for that. I've been preparing for ugly for 6 months, Lena said quietly. At least this time I'm fighting back. At 7:30, Damien's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then showed Lena the screen. It was a text from Marco with a screenshot attached. Grant Harlow, standing in the Hartwell Tower lobby, looking furious, demanding to know where Lena was. He's already looking for you, Damien said. You should make that call to HR. Establish the sick leave now before he tries to claim you abandoned your job. Lena pulled out her phone with shaking hands. Damien stood and walked to the counter to give her privacy, but he watched her reflection in the window, the way she straightened her spine, composed herself, and made the call with a voice that didn't waver. When she finished, she looked lighter somehow, like putting distance between herself and Harlow, even for a few minutes. Let her breathe. They approved 2 weeks, she said when he returned to the table. I have accumulated sick days I've never used. They said I should take care of myself. Good. That gives us time. Damien pulled out another business card, this one with his real name and private number. From now on, you call me directly if anything happens. If Harlow shows up at your apartment, if he threatens you, if anything feels wrong, you call. Day or night, I'll answer. Lena took the card, studied it. Damien Valente. She looked up. That's your real name? Yes. Should I know who you are? Damien smiled slightly. Probably not. I keep a low profile in certain circles, but if you do some research and don't like what you find, I'll understand. Are you dangerous? Yes, Damien said honestly, but not to you. Lena slipped the card into her wallet. I don't know if that should make me feel better or worse. Better, Damien said, because it means I know how to handle men like Harlow. I know how they think, how they operate, what scares them, and I know how to make them stop. They left the coffee shop separately, Lena first, then Damien 10 minutes later. He watched her walk away, shoulders back, head up, and felt something unfamiliar stir in his chest. Hope, maybe, or the beginning of belief that some things could actually be fixed. His phone rang as he reached his car. Elena. Tell me you got her cooperation, Elena said without preamble. I did. She's willing to go on record, testify, the whole thing. She's taking sick leave starting today. Good. Because we just got something big. One of Harlow's previous victims agreed to talk to us. Off the record for now, but she's willing to detail what happened and confirm the pattern. If we can get 2 more, we've got a case that's impossible to ignore. Keep pushing, Damien said. What about Tyler's arrest records? Marco's contact came through, the confidential informant who set Tyler up, paid $3,000 by the same legal trust that funded his defense. It's textbook entrapment. We can get his record expunged and possibly go after whoever authorized the setup. Do it. I want Tyler completely clear before this goes public. He's been through enough. Damien started the car. And I want security on both of them, discreet but thorough. If Harlow figures out what we're doing, he might escalate. Already arranged. We've got eyes on Lena's apartment and Tyler's dorm. They won't know we're there, but they're covered. Damien ended the call and pulled out into traffic, his mind already working through the next steps. They had evidence, they had testimony, they had a victim willing to fight. Now they needed to build a case so airtight that Harlow couldn't wriggle out of it. But there was something else bothering him. A detail in the financial records that didn't quite fit. Harlow had money. Not criminal empire money, but enough to maintain a comfortable lifestyle. Yet he'd gone to elaborate lengths to trap Lena. Had spent $75,000 to buy leverage over a receptionist. That was excessive even for a predator, which meant there was something about Lena specifically that Harlow wanted. Damien made a mental note to dig deeper, because in his experience, when something didn't make sense, it usually meant you were missing a piece of the puzzle. Over the next 3 days, while Lena stayed safely away from the Hartwell Tower, Damien's team worked with surgical precision. Elena tracked down 2 more of Harlow's previous victims, both willing to provide statements detailing similar patterns of manipulation, isolation, and assault. Marco's investigation into Tyler's arrest uncovered enough irregularities to file a motion for expungement, with a hearing scheduled within the month. And Damien himself returned to the building, watching Harlow's behavior deteriorate as he realized Lena wasn't coming back. The man was unraveling. He'd called Lena 17 times in 3 days, left 12 voicemails that ranged from concern to threatening. He demanded HR give him her home address, been refused, and then tried to access personnel files himself. He'd questioned other staff members, tried to find out if anyone had seen her, if anyone knew where she was. On Friday afternoon, Harlow finally cracked. Damien was in the lobby, reviewing security protocols with the building's actual head of security, when Harlow stormed out of the elevator and headed straight for the front desk where a temp receptionist sat looking nervous. "Where is she?" Harlow demanded. The temp, a young man named Jordan, blinked in confusion. "I'm sorry, sir?" "Lena Hart. Where is she? Why isn't she here?" "I was told she's on medical leave, sir. I'm covering her shifts until she returns." "Medical leave." Harlow's voice dripped with contempt. "She's not sick. She's avoiding me. Did she say anything to you? Did she tell you where she was going?" "No, sir. I've never met her. I just started today." Harlow leaned over the desk, invading Jordan's space. "You tell her, when she finally decides to grace us with her presence, that we need to have a very serious conversation about professional responsibility and loyalty." Jordan nodded quickly, clearly intimidated. Harlow stalked off toward the elevators, radiating fury. Damien caught the entire interaction on his phone's camera. More evidence. More documentation of Harlow's obsessive behavior and inability to accept boundaries. That evening, Damien met with his team in his office to review everything they'd compiled. The conference table was covered with documents, financial records, witness statements, security footage, medical reports from Lena's doctor confirming injuries consistent with assault. "We're ready," Elena said.
We've got enough to take to the DA's office and make a compelling case for criminal charges. Assault, coercion, possibly fraud given how he manufactured Tyler's situation.
What about the civil case? Damien asked. Even stronger, Elena said. We can demonstrate hostile work environment, sexual harassment, intentional infliction of emotional distress. Lena could sue both Harlow and the property management company for failing to protect her.
She'd likely win substantial damages. But criminal prosecution is harder, Marco added. Defense attorneys will argue everything was consensual, that Lana's making it up. They'll try to paint her as unstable or vindictive. Which is why we need the other victims, Damien said. To show this isn't one woman's word, it's a documented pattern spanning years. All 3 previous victims are willing to testify in a criminal case, Elena confirmed. But they're scared. They've been threatened before, had their lives turned upside down. They need to know they'll be protected. They will be, Damien promised. Whatever they need, security, legal support, relocation if it comes to that. I'll cover it. Marco studied him thoughtfully. You're really going all in on this. Yes. Why? I mean, I get that Harlow's a piece of shit who deserves to go down, but you've walked away from worse situations. What makes this one different? Damien was quiet for a moment, thinking about Lena's face when she'd asked him the same question, about the way she'd flinched in the lobby that first day, about the carefully maintained invisibility she'd wrapped around herself like armor. Because she asked for help, he said finally. Because she decided to fight back instead of disappearing. And because if we can't protect someone like her, someone who did everything right, who worked hard, who tried to help her family, then what's the point of any of this? Elena and Marco exchanged glances but didn't push further. So what's next? Elena asked. We talked to the DA, Damien said. Set up a meeting for early next week. I want everything organized and ready to present. And I want to make sure they understand this isn't going to quietly disappear like Harlow's previous cases. Understood. Elena gathered her files. I'll make the calls tomorrow. After they left, Damien stood at his window, looking out over the city. His phone rang, Lena's number. Are you okay? He answered immediately. I'm fine, Lena said, but her voice was shaky. Harlow just called again. 19th time today. The voicemail was different. Different how? Threatening. He said I was making a mistake, that I didn't understand who I was dealing with, that there would be consequences if I didn't come back and make things right with him. Damien's jaw tightened. I need you to send me that voicemail. And Lena, do not respond to him. Don't answer his calls. Don't reply to his messages. Let him keep digging his own grave. I know, Lena's voice cracked. I keep thinking about Monday, when I have to go back eventually, when I have to see him again. You're not going back, Damien said firmly. Not to that job, not to that building. When this is over, you're going to have options, better options. But right now, I need you to stay away and stay safe. Okay? Lena took a shaky breath. Damien, thank you for believing me, for helping me, for not making me feel crazy. You're not crazy, Damien said quietly. You're one of the strongest people I've ever met, and I'm going to make sure Harlow never has the chance to hurt you or anyone else again. After they hung up, Damien made one more call to a contact he'd been avoiding using because once you called in this particular favor, there was no taking it back. I need information, he said when the line connected. Grant Harlow, building manager at the Hartwell Tower. I want to know everything. Who he's connected to, who's protecting him, and who's going to have a problem when we take him down. This going to cause waves? The contact asked. Tsunami, Damien said. And I want to know exactly who's going to drown. He ended the call and returned to the window, watching the city lights. Somewhere out there, Grant Harlow was probably sleeping soundly, confident in his power, certain that Lena would eventually cave like all the others. He was in for a very rude awakening, because Damien Valente had built an empire on making sure that predators learned eventually that there was always someone bigger and more dangerous waiting in the shadows. And this time, that someone was him. The call came back at 3 a.m, which told Damien everything he needed to know about how serious the information was. He answered on the first ring, already awake, already dressed, staring at the city from his penthouse office. "You're not going to like this," his contact said without preamble. "Tell me anyway." Harlow's got protection. Not street level, political. His brother-in-law is Deputy Mayor Richard Chen. They're not close, but Chen's made calls in the past to smooth over complaints. Nothing overt, just enough pressure to make problems go away quietly. Damien felt cold certainty settle in his chest. How deep does it go? Deep enough that when you move on Harlow, Chen's going to know about it, and he's not going to be happy. He's up for re-election next year, can't afford a scandal touching his family. So he'll fight back. He'll try. But here's the thing, Chen's clean otherwise, boring, competent, genuinely popular. This is his only vulnerability. If you can prove Harlow's pattern of abuse without it looking like a political hit, Chen might actually cut him loose to save his own career. And if we can't, then you're going to war with City Hall, which, knowing you, probably doesn't scare you much, but it's going to make things messy for everyone involved. Damien processed this, running scenarios. What about the DA's office? Are they going to bury this to protect Chen? Depends which DA you talk to. Patricia Morrison in the Special Victims Unit. She's got a reputation for not giving a damn about politics when it comes to harassment cases. She's also ambitious enough that a high-profile conviction would boost her career. If you can get the case to her specifically, she'll run with it. Good, that's good. Damien made notes. Anything else I should know? Yeah, Harlow's got a sealed juvenile record. I couldn't get details, but it involves assault on a female classmate when he was 17. Someone with money made it disappear. But the pattern goes back further than you thought. Damien's grip on the phone tightened. Send me everything you have, and thank you. Don't thank me yet. This is going to get ugly before it gets better. Be ready. The line went dead, leaving Damien alone with the weight of what came next. He'd known there would be complications. Predators like Harlow didn't operate in isolation. They built systems of protection around themselves. But political connections meant the fallout would extend beyond one man's destruction. It meant collateral damage, careful timing, and the possibility that even with all their evidence, Harlow might slip through the cracks if someone with enough power decided to protect him, unless they moved faster than the protection could mobilize. Damien called Elena at 6 a.m., knowing she'd already be awake. "We've got a problem," he said, and laid out the political situation. Elena was quiet for a long moment. Chen's not going to let this go quietly. He'll lean on the DA, try to bury the investigation before it starts. We need to make this public before he has a chance to work behind the scenes. Agreed, but we can't just dump this to the media. Lena would get destroyed, and Harlow's lawyers would claim she's doing this for attention or money. So we need it to come from law enforcement first, Elena said, thinking out loud. An official investigation, arrest warrant, charges filed. Once it's in the system, it's harder for Chen to make disappear. Can we get to Morrison directly? I have a contact in the SVU who might be willing to make an introduction. But Damien, even if Morrison takes the case, she's going to need Lena's cooperation. Full statement, detailed testimony, willingness to face cross-examination. This isn't something we can do without her being fully on board. I know. Damien checked the time. Set up the meeting with Morrison. I'll talk to Lena today, make sure she understands what she's walking into. He met Lena at a different coffee shop, this one in a neighborhood far from the Hartwell Tower. She arrived exactly on time, looking worn but determined. The bruise on her cheekbone had faded to yellow-green, but there were new shadows under her eyes that spoke of sleepless nights. You look tired, Damien said as she slid into the booth. Harlow called 32 times yesterday, Lena said flatly. I stopped counting the voicemails. My phone's been on silent, but I can see the notifications. He's losing it. Good. That works in our favor. Damien pulled out his tablet. But I need to tell you something, and you're not going to like it. Lena's expression went carefully neutral. What? Harlow has political protection. His brother-in-law is Deputy Mayor Richard Chen. That's probably how he's gotten away with this for so long. Chen's been running interference, making complaints disappear. The color drained from Lena's face. The deputy mayor, you're telling me we're going up against the deputy mayor? Not directly. Chen's exposure is minimal. He didn't commit any crimes, he just made some calls.
But when we move on Harlow, Chen's gonna know, and he's going to try to protect his family connection. So what does that mean? Lena's voice was thin. Does it mean we can't win? No. Damien leaned forward, holding her gaze. It means we have to be smarter and faster. We go straight to the DA's office, specifically to Patricia Morrison in Special Victims. She's got a reputation for not backing down from political pressure. We give her everything we have, get formal charges filed before Chen even knows there's an investigation. Once it's official, once there's a warrant and media coverage, it's much harder to make disappear. Lena absorbed this, her hands wrapped tightly around her coffee cup. But it also means the blowback is going to be worse. Chen's going to come after me, isn't he? Discredit me, make me look like I'm lying. Probably, Damien said honestly, which is why I need to know you're absolutely sure about this. Because once we start, there's no going back. This stops being a private matter and becomes a public case. Your name will be out there. Reporters will dig into your life. Harlow's defense team will attack your credibility. It's going to be brutal. Lena was quiet for a long time, staring into her coffee like it held answers. When she finally looked up, her eyes were wet, but her voice was steady. 6 months ago, I was working reception and trying to put Tyler through school. I had a plan, save money, finish my own degree, maybe get into nonprofit management, build something that mattered. Then Harlow happened, and I became someone I didn't recognize. Someone who flinched at shadows, who hid bruises, who couldn't sleep because I was terrified of what tomorrow would bring. She wiped her eyes roughly. If I walk away now, that's who I stay. Forever. The woman who is too scared to fight back. But if I do this, even if I lose, even if it destroys me, at least I tried. At least I stood up and said this isn't okay. And maybe the next woman he targets will see that and find the courage to fight too. Damien felt something shift in his chest, a rare moment of genuine admiration. You're remarkable. You know that? I'm terrified, Lena corrected. But I'm also really, really angry, and I think the anger might be stronger. Good. Use that. Damien pulled up the meeting details. Morrison can see us tomorrow morning. You'll need to give a complete statement. Everything Harlow did, dates, details, as much as you can remember. It's going to be hard. I've been writing it down, Lena said quietly. Every night since we first talked. Everything I can remember. Who said what, when, where. I've got 6 months of nightmare documented in a journal that I've been too afraid to let anyone see. Bring it tomorrow. And Lena, Morrison's going to ask you questions that feel invasive and awful. She has to, because Harlow's defense team is going to ask worse. If you need to take breaks, if you need to stop, just say so. There's no shame in that. Lena nodded, her jaw set. What about Tyler? Does he need to know about this? Eventually, yes, but not until we're ready to file charges. The fewer people who know beforehand, the better. Can you keep this from him for a few more days? He's focused on midterms right now anyway. He won't question why I'm not calling as much. Lena's expression softened slightly. How is he? The legal stuff with his record? Marco's contact filed the motion to expunge. Hearing scheduled for 3 weeks from now. Between the evidence of entrapment and Tyler's perfect probation record, the judge will likely grant it. Your brother's going to get a clean slate. For the first time since Damien had met her, Lena's smile was genuine. He's a good kid. He made one stupid mistake and Harlow turned it into a weapon. Tyler deserves better than that. So do you, Damien said quietly. They spent another hour going over logistics, what to expect from Morrison, how the investigation would proceed, what protections could be put in place if Harlow tried to retaliate. When they finally left the coffee shop, Lena looked steadier, like having a plan made the fear more manageable. Damien watched her drive away, then made a call. Marco, I need you to pull every piece of surveillance from the Hartwell Tower for the next 48 hours. If Harlow tries to access Lena's personnel file, if he contacts anyone about her, if he so much as mentions her name in an elevator, I want to know about it. You think he's going to escalate? I think he's spiraling. Lena's been gone for almost a week, not responding to his calls, and his control is slipping. Men like Harlow don't handle loss of control well. He's going to do something stupid, and when he does, I want it documented. Marco was quiet for a moment. And if he does something more than stupid, if he goes to her apartment, tries to force a confrontation, then we stop him, Damien said coldly. Whatever it takes. That night, Damien couldn't sleep.
He kept thinking about Lena's face when she talked about becoming someone she didn't recognize, about the careful way she'd documented 6 months of abuse in a journal she'd been too afraid to show anyone, about the strength it took to decide fighting back was worth the cost. He'd spent 20 years in a world where power meant the ability to hurt people without consequences. He'd been good at it, had built an empire on being ruthless and calculating, but somewhere along the way he'd forgotten what that power looked like from the other side, what it felt like to be the person with no options, no resources, no way out. Lena had reminded him. At 2 a.m., his phone rang. Marco. Harlow just tried to access the building's security footage, Marco said. Specifically, footage from the lobby during Lena's shifts. The security company flagged it as unusual and denied the request, but he's clearly looking for something. Evidence that she talked to someone, Damien said, already pulling up the surveillance logs on his laptop. He's trying to figure out if she had help, if someone put her up to leaving. There's more. He called HR at home, woke up the director at midnight demanding Lena's home address, said it was an emergency, that he needed to check on her welfare. HR refused, told him to go through official channels during business hours. So he's desperate enough to break protocol. Damien made notes. Which means he's close to doing something reckless. Double the security on Lena's apartment. I want someone watching 24/7. Already done. She's covered. Damien ended the call and stared at the screen, watching the pattern of Harlow's behavior spiral tighter and more erratic. This was the dangerous phase when predators realized their control was slipping and decided to reassert dominance through force. He sent Lena a text. Stay inside tomorrow. Don't go anywhere alone. I'll explain when I pick you up for the meeting with Morrison. Her response came almost immediately. Can't sleep anyway. Is something wrong? Just being cautious. Try to rest. Tomorrow's going to be hard. Damien? Thank you for all of this. I know I keep saying it, but I mean it. You don't have to thank me. Just be ready to tell your story. That's all that matters now. He set down the phone and returned to the window, watching the city sleep. Somewhere out there, Grant Harlow was probably pacing his expensive apartment, furious that someone had dared to defy him, calling Lena's phone over and over, leaving increasingly unhinged messages, trying to figure out how to regain control of a situation that was slipping further away with every passing hour. Let him spiral, Damien thought. Let him panic. Because panicked men made mistakes, and Damien was very good at using mistakes to destroy his enemies. The next morning dawned cold and gray, the kind of November weather that promised snow before nightfall. Damien picked Lana up at 8, noting the security detail parked discreetly down the block. She looked exhausted but resolute, carrying a worn notebook that Damien assumed was her journal. Ready? He asked as she settled into the passenger seat of his car, a nondescript sedan, nothing flashy. No, Lena said honestly. But I'm doing it anyway. The drive to the DA's office was quiet. Damien didn't push conversation, just let Lena gather herself. When they arrived, Elena was already waiting in the lobby with a woman Damien recognized from photos. Patricia Morrison, early 40s, sharp eyes, and a reputation for winning cases that everyone else said were unwinnable. Ms. Hart, Morrison said, extending her hand. Thank you for coming in. I know this isn't easy. Lena shook her hand, her grip firmer than Damien expected. Thank you for seeing me. Morrison led them to a conference room designed for victim interviews. Softer lighting, comfortable furniture, a box of tissues on the table that acknowledged the reality of what happened in this space. She sat across from Lena, her expression professional but kind. Before we start, I want to make sure you understand what's going to happen here, Morrison said. I'm going to ask you to tell me everything about your relationship with Grant Harlow. Everything he did, everything he said, every instance where you felt threatened or unsafe. It's going to be difficult, and some of my questions are going to feel invasive. But I need a complete picture if we're going to prosecute this case. Do you understand? Yes, Lena said quietly. And you're here voluntarily? No one's forcing you to make this statement? I'm here because I'm tired of being afraid, Lena said. And because if I don't stop him, he's going to do this to someone else. Morrison nodded, a flicker of respect crossing her face. All right, let's begin. Start from the beginning. When did you first meet Grant Harlow? What followed was 3 hours of testimony that made Damien's blood boil. Lena spoke in a quiet, steady voice, reading from her journal when her memory faltered, describing 6 months of systematic abuse with a detail that was both heartbreaking and damning. She talked about the errands that weren't part of her job, the criticism that destroyed her confidence, the first time Harlow grabbed her wrist hard enough to leave bruises. Morrison took notes, asked clarifying questions, never once suggesting disbelief or judgment. She was good at this, Damien realized, creating a space where victims felt safe enough to tell the truth. "Tell me about Tyler," Morrison said gently. "Your brother. How did Harlow use him against you?" Lena's hands tightened around her journal. "Tyler got arrested 6 months ago. Drug charges. He was dealing to pay for school. Stupid, I know, but he was desperate. The public defender said he was looking at 3 to 5 years. Then this lawyer showed up, someone expensive, and suddenly the charges got reduced. Tyler got probation instead of prison." "And how did you learn about Harlow's involvement?" 2 weeks after Tyler's sentencing, Harlow called me into his office. He told me he knew about Tyler's trouble, that he'd arranged for help through a charitable foundation he was involved with. He said Tyler's freedom was a gift, and that gifts came with expectations. "What kind of expectations?" "Loyalty, discretion, absolute obedience to whatever he asked." Lena's voice cracked slightly. "He said if I ever tried to leave, if I ever complained about him or caused problems, he'd make sure Tyler's probation was revoked, that Tyler would end up in prison where—" She stopped, swallowed hard. "Where bad things happen to young men who can't protect themselves." Morrison's expression hardened. "He threatened your brother's safety directly?" "Yes, multiple times, whenever I hesitated or tried to push back on something he wanted me to do." "Did he ever specify what he wanted you to do?" This was the hard part. Damien could see Lena bracing herself, gathering courage. "At first it was just extra work. Then it was tolerating inappropriate comments about my appearance, my body. Then it was physical contact, touching my shoulder, my back, standing too close. When I tried to create distance, he'd remind me about Tyler, about how fragile probation was, how easy it would be to make problems." "Did the physical contact escalate?" "Yes." Lena's voice was barely above a whisper. "He started calling me to his office more frequently. Sometimes he'd grab my wrist or my arm when I tried to leave. Left bruises. I started wearing long sleeves all the time so no one would ask questions." "Did anyone ever ask questions?" "A couple of coworkers noticed I seemed upset or jumpy. I told them I was fine, just stressed about family stuff. I couldn't tell them the truth because Harlow had cameras everywhere, knew everyone's schedules, controlled everything that happened in that building. I felt like he was always watching." Morrison made a note. "Tell me about the incident last week, the one that led to you taking leave." Lena closed her eyes, and Damien saw her fighting for control. "He was angry that I'd made a mistake on some paperwork, called me to his office, started yelling. Then he grabbed me, pushed me against the wall, and—" Her voice broke. "He put his hand around my throat. Not enough to really hurt me, but enough that I understood he could. That any time he wanted, he could do worse." "Did he say anything while this was happening?" "He said I needed to remember who was in charge, that I belonged to him now, and the sooner I accepted that, the easier things would be." Lena opened her eyes, tears streaming down her face. "That's when I knew I had to get out, because it wasn't going to stop. It was only going to get worse until he... "It's okay," Morrison said gently. "You don't have to say it. I understand." She slid the tissue box closer. "Miss Hart, you've been incredibly brave coming forward with this. I know it wasn't easy." Lena wiped her eyes, her hands shaking. "Do you believe me?" "Yes," Morrison said without hesitation. "And I think we have enough to pursue criminal charges. Assault, coercion, stalking, potentially others. Mr. Valente's team has provided additional evidence, financial records, witness statements from previous victims, surveillance footage. This is a strong case." "But?" Lena asked, because there was clearly a but coming. "But you need to understand what you're signing up for," Morrison said seriously. "Grant Harlow is going to hire the best defense attorneys money can buy. They're going to argue this was all consensual, that you're lying for money or revenge. They're going to dig into every aspect of your life looking for ammunition.
and his brother-in-law's political connections mean this case is going to attract media attention you're not prepared for. I know, Lena said quietly. Damien already warned me. I'm still willing to do it. Morrison studied her for a long moment. Why? And I'm not questioning your motivations. I just need to understand what's driving you, because that's what's going to keep you going when this gets ugly. Lena looked down at her journal, at 6 months of pain documented in cramped handwriting. Because I have a little brother who looks up to me, who thinks I'm strong and capable and someone worth admiring. And right now I'm none of those things. I'm a victim who let herself be controlled and hurt because I was too afraid to fight back. But if I do this, if I stand up and say what Harlow did was wrong and he needs to face consequences, then maybe I become the person Tyler thinks I am. Maybe I prove that being afraid doesn't mean you're weak. It just means you're human, and being human means you get to choose whether fear controls you or you control it. Morrison smiled, genuine warmth breaking through professional composure. Ms. Hart, I've been prosecuting sex crimes and harassment cases for 15 years. I've heard a lot of reasons why victims come forward, but that might be the best one I've ever heard. I'm going to do everything in my power to make sure Grant Harlow faces justice. When? Lena asked. When does this become official? I need to review all the evidence your team has compiled, consult with my supervisors, and prepare the charging documents. If everything holds up the way I think it will, we'll have an arrest warrant by early next week. Maybe sooner if Harlow does something that gives us probable cause for immediate action. As if on cue, Damien's phone buzzed. He glanced at it, then stood abruptly. Morrison, we need to wrap this up, now. Everyone turned to stare at him. What's wrong? Lena asked, fear creeping into her voice. Damien showed her the message from Marco. Harlow just left the Hartwell Tower. He's driving toward Lena's neighborhood. I've got units mobilizing, but he's moving fast. The room went very still. He's coming for me, Lena whispered. Morrison was already reaching for her phone. I can have police at your apartment in 10 minutes. Not fast enough, Damien said. He's 5 minutes out and desperate. Lena, did you leave anything at your apartment that identifies where you are right now? Lena thought frantically. No, I don't think... Wait, my calendar. I have a wall calendar in my kitchen. Today's date has DA meeting 9 a.m. written on it. Does it say which DA's office? No, just DA meeting. Then he doesn't know you're here specifically. Damien made a decision. Morrison, file for an emergency protective order, right now based on stalking and the threatening voicemails. If Harlow shows up at Lena's apartment, that's a violation we can arrest him for immediately. I'll have it within the hour, Morrison promised, already typing on her laptop. Damien turned to Lena. You're not going home. Not today. Not until Harlow's in custody. I have a secure location you can stay at. No, Lena interrupted. No more hiding. If he's there, if he's violated my space and trying to intimidate me, then I want to be there when he gets arrested. I want him to see that I'm not afraid anymore. Lena, that's not smart. If he's desperate enough, then your security team will stop him before he gets to me, Lena said firmly. But I'm done letting him chase me out of my own life. If we're doing this, we're doing it now. Damien looked at Morrison, who shrugged. It's her call. But we do this by the book. Police presence, protective order in place, everything documented. Fine, Damien said, already texting Marco. But we're going in with enough backup that Harlow wouldn't dare try anything. 20 minutes later, they were in a convoy of 3 vehicles heading toward Lena's apartment. Damien and Lena in one car, Elena and Morrison in another, and an unmarked police unit bringing up the rear. Marco was already on scene with 2 of Damien's security team, monitoring Harlow's vehicle as it circled Lena's block. He's been sitting outside her building for 12 minutes, Marco reported over the phone. Just sitting in his car, staring at the entrance. Classic stalker behavior. Do not engage, Damien ordered. Let him make the first move. We need this clean. They parked 2 blocks away and approached on foot, staying out of sight. From their vantage point, Damien could see Harlow's expensive sedan idling at the curb, engine running. The man himself was visible through the windshield, phone pressed to his ear. He's calling her again, Marco murmured from his position across the street. Lena's phone buzzed in her pocket. She pulled it out, showed Damien the screen. Harlow calling, 38th call. Don't answer, Morrison said. Let it go to voicemail. Every message is evidence.
They watched Harlow slam his hand against the steering wheel in frustration when Lena didn't answer. Then, to everyone's shock, he got out of the car and walked toward the apartment building's entrance. "He's going in," Marco said tensely. "Do we stop him?" Morrison checked her phone. "Protective order just came through. The second he attempts contact with Lena or enters her private residence, he's in violation. Police, are you ready?" The unmarked unit's officer spoke into his radio. "Ready. We've got backup 2 minutes out." They watched Harlow buzz Lena's apartment. When no one answered, he tried the main door, locked, requiring a code. He stood there for a moment, visibly furious, then pulled out his phone and made a call. "He's calling the property manager," Elena said, listening through a scanner app on her tablet. "Demanding they give him Lena's apartment access code, claiming it's a building emergency." "They won't," Lena said quietly. "Management company is strict about that. Too much liability." Sure enough, Harlow's face contorted with rage as whoever he was talking to apparently refused his request. He hung up, looked around wildly, then did something that made Damien's blood run cold. He picked up a decorative rock from the landscaping and threw it at Lena's first-floor window. The glass cracked, but didn't shatter. Harlow picked up another rock. "That's it," Morrison said. "That's destruction of property and attempted forced entry. Officers, you're clear to engage." The police unit moved in fast, badges visible, hands near weapons. "Grant Harlow, step away from the building and put your hands where we can see them." Harlow spun around, rock still in his hand, shock and fury warring on his face. "What?" "I'm just trying to check on a friend who hasn't been answering her phone. I was worried." "Put the rock down and step away from the building, now." For a moment, Damien thought Harlow might actually throw the rock at the officers. The man's face was twisted with rage, his control completely shattered. But survival instinct kicked in, and he dropped the rock, hands raised. "This is insane," Harlow sputtered. "I work with Lena. I was concerned about her welfare. This is police harassment. Mr. Harlow, there's an active protective order prohibiting you from contact with Lena Hart or approaching her residence," one of the officers said, pulling out handcuffs. "You're under arrest for violation of that order and attempted destruction of property." "A protective order? That's ridiculous. Lena and I are—" "Turn around. Hands behind your back." From their vantage point, Damien watched Grant Harlow's perfect facade crumble completely. The confident building manager who terrorized women for years was now shouting incoherently about misunderstandings and false accusations as officers cuffed him and read him his rights. Beside him, Lena had gone very still, her eyes fixed on the scene unfolding before them. "Are you okay?" Damien asked quietly. "I don't know," Lena whispered. "I thought I'd feel triumphant or relieved or something, but mostly I just feel empty. Like I've been holding my breath for 6 months and I finally got to exhale, but now I don't know what to do with the air." Morrison approached, her expression grim but satisfied. "That was quite a show. We've got him on multiple charges now: protective order violation, attempted forced entry, destruction of property, stalking. Combined with your testimony and the evidence of prior abuse, this is going to be a very strong case." "What happens now?" Lena asked. "Now he gets booked, arraigned, probably makes bail, but with strict conditions, including no contact with you. We continue building the case, reach out to his other victims, prepare for trial. It's going to take months, maybe a year. But Lena, we've got him. He's done." They watched the police car drive away with Harlow in the back seat, still shouting about injustice and false accusations. His voice faded into the distance, taking with it 6 months of terror and control. Lena took a shaky breath. "It's really over?" "This part is," Damien said, "but there's still a lot of work ahead. Are you ready for that?" Lena looked at her cracked window, at the rocks Harlow had thrown, at the evidence of his desperation and rage. Then she looked at Morrison, at Elena, at Damien and Marco, and the team that had helped her reach this moment. "Yeah," she said, her voice stronger than it had been in months. "I'm ready." The aftermath of Harlow's arrest moved faster than anyone expected. By Monday morning, the story had broken wide across local media, not because anyone leaked it, but because Grant Harlow himself couldn't stop talking. His bail hearing had been a spectacle, expensive lawyers arguing for release, Morrison countering with evidence of escalating violent behavior, and Harlow interrupting repeatedly to proclaim his innocence until the judge threatened him with contempt. He'd made bail, as Morrison predicted, but with conditions so restrictive they essentially put him under house arrest. No contact with Lena or any other witnesses, electronic monitoring, surrender of passport, prohibition from entering the Hartwell Tower or coming within 500 feet of Lena's residence. The media coverage started small, buried in the local crime section, but by Tuesday it had exploded. Someone had connected the dots between Harlow's arrest and Deputy Mayor Chen's family ties, and suddenly this wasn't just a harassment case, it was a political scandal. Damien watched the news coverage from his office, Elena beside him reviewing the morning's headlines. Chen's office released a statement, Elena said, pulling it up on her tablet. He's calling the charges shocking and disappointing, says he had no knowledge of his brother-in-law's alleged behavior, and pledges full cooperation with the investigation. Classic political distance move. Is it working? Damien asked. For now, but Morrison's office just announced they're looking into whether Chen used his position to suppress previous complaints against Harlow. If they find evidence of obstruction, Chen's career is over. Damien's phone buzzed, a text from Lena. 3 reporters showed up at my apartment this morning. Had to leave through the back entrance. Is this going to get worse? He called her immediately. Are you safe? I'm at Tyler's dorm. He finally knows everything. Lena's voice was strained. He's furious at Harlow, at himself for not seeing what was happening, at the whole situation, but he's handling it. How are you handling it? There was a long pause. Honestly? I keep waiting for Harlow to show up. I know he can't. I know he's being monitored, but every time a door opens or my phone rings, I think it's him. Is that going to go away? Eventually, Damien said gently, but it takes time. Trauma doesn't disappear just because the threat is gone. Have you thought about talking to someone, a therapist who specializes in this kind of thing? Morrison recommended someone. I have an appointment Thursday. Another pause. Damien, the news is saying there are 4 other women who've come forward. Is that true? 5 now. Morrison's team has been reaching out to Harlow's previous victims. Once your story went public, they felt safe enough to add their voices. The pattern's undeniable now. 5 women. Lena's voice cracked. 5 women he did this to, and no one stopped him until now. You stopped him, Damien said firmly. You decided to fight back, and that gave the others permission to do the same. Don't minimize what you've done. I just wish I'd done it sooner, before he had time to hurt anyone else. Lena, listen to me. You are not responsible for Harlow's choices. He's responsible. The system that protected him is responsible. The people who looked the other way are responsible. But you're the reason he's finally facing consequences. He heard her take a shaky breath. Thank you for everything. I don't think I've said that enough. You've said it plenty. Now focus on taking care of yourself. Let Morrison and my team handle the legal stuff. Your job is to heal. After they hung up, Damien turned back to Elena. What's the temperature on the criminal case? Strong and getting stronger. Morrison's building a pattern of behavior prosecution using all 5 victims' testimonies. Harlow's lawyers are pushing for a plea deal, but Morrison's refusing anything less than significant prison time. Good. What about the civil side? Lena could sue both Harlow and the property management company for damages. Given the documented abuse and the company's failure to protect her, she'd likely win substantial compensation. Enough to finish her degree, get Tyler through school, start over somewhere safe. Damien made a note. Set up a meeting with the best employment law attorney we know. I want Lena to understand all her options. Already done. Meeting's tomorrow. Elena studied him with open curiosity. You're really invested in this. Yes. Why? And before you give me the standard answer about stopping predators, I want the real one. You've walked away from worse situations. What makes Lena Hart different? Damien was quiet for a moment, thinking about Lena's face when she'd whispered, "Please don't tell anyone," in that lobby 3 weeks ago. About the journals she'd kept, documenting her own nightmare because some part of her believed it mattered. About the courage it took to stand up when standing up meant risking everything. Because she reminded me what power is supposed to be for, he said finally. I've spent 20 years using it to protect my interests, eliminate threats, build empires. But power can also mean standing between someone vulnerable and someone who wants to hurt them. It can mean making sure the fight is fair when one person has everything and the other has nothing. Lena didn't need me to rescue her. She needed someone to give her the tools to rescue herself. That's different. Elena smiled slightly. You're getting philosophical in your old age. I'm 38. That's not old. It's old enough to know better than to get emotionally involved with cases. Elena's tone was gentle, but pointed. Be careful, Damien. Lena's vulnerable right now, and you've been her hero. Don't mistake gratitude for something else. I know what it is, Damien said quietly, and I know where the boundaries are. When this is over, she's going to move on with her life, and I'm going to return to mine. But right now, she needs someone in her corner who won't abandon her when things get messy. I can be that person. The mess arrived on Wednesday morning in the form of Harlow's defense team launching a media offensive. They held a press conference outside the courthouse, painting their client as a victim of a vindictive conspiracy orchestrated by women seeking financial gain and a DA's office looking for political scalps. The lead attorney, a silver-haired man named Gregory Walsh, who specialized in defending wealthy men accused of sexual misconduct, spoke with practiced sympathy about how false accusations destroyed lives and reputations. He implied Lena was unstable, that her relationship with Harlow had been consensual and mutually beneficial, and that she'd fabricated abuse claims when she didn't get the professional advancement she'd wanted. Damien watched the press conference with mounting fury, Marco beside him already working on countermeasures. Walsh is going to be a problem, Marco said. He's got a reputation for destroying victims on the stand. He'll dig into every aspect of Lena's life looking for ammunition. Then we dig deeper into his, Damien said coldly. I want to know every case he's ever handled, every dirty trick he's ever used, every corner he's ever cut. If there's leverage, find it. You want me to go after the lawyer. I want you to be ready to go after the lawyer if he crosses lines. There's a difference between vigorous defense and character assassination. If Walsh tries to destroy Lena's life to save Harlow's career, he needs to understand there will be consequences. Marco nodded, already making notes. What about Chen? He's been quiet since the initial statement, but his political allies are starting to circle the wagons. There's talk of him claiming this is a partisan attack designed to damage him before the election. Let them talk. Morrison's investigation into his involvement is ongoing. If he actually obstructed justice to protect Harlow, no amount of political spin will save him. Damien checked his watch. I'm meeting Lena at the civil attorney's office in an hour. Keep monitoring the situation and let me know if anything changes. The civil attorney, Margaret Chen, no relation to the deputy mayor, was a fierce woman in her 50s with a reputation for making corporations pay dearly for enabling harassment. Her office was lined with plaques commemorating multi-million-dollar settlements and jury verdicts that had changed employment law precedent. Lena arrived looking exhausted, dark circles under her eyes that makeup couldn't quite hide. She'd been staying with Tyler, avoiding her own apartment where reporters still occasionally lurked, trying to process trauma while living in the middle of a media circus. Ms. Hart, Margaret said warmly, gesturing to a comfortable chair. Thank you for coming in. I know this has been an overwhelming time. That's an understatement, Lena said, managing a weak smile. I feel like I'm living in someone else's life. That's normal. Trauma and public attention are both disorienting. Margaret pulled up a presentation on her laptop. I've reviewed all the evidence Mr. Valente's team has provided, as well as the criminal case documents. I want to talk to you about your options for civil litigation. I don't care about the money, Lena said immediately. I just want him stopped. I understand, but money is how the civil justice system measures accountability. And in this case, it's not just about punishing Harlow. It's about forcing the property management company to change their practices so this doesn't happen to the next woman who works for them. Margaret pulled up a timeline. The property management company that owns the Hartwell Tower had 3 formal complaints about Grant Harlow in the 2 years before you started working there. All 3 were settled quietly with non-disclosure agreements. That suggests they knew he was a problem and chose to protect their investment rather than their employees. They knew? Lena's voice was hollow. They knew what he was doing, and they let him keep his job? Not only that, they promoted him, gave him more authority, more access to potential victims. That's called negligent retention. Keeping an employee you know is dangerous. In civil court, that's enormous liability. Lena looked at Damien. You knew about this? We suspected, Damien said carefully, but we needed documentation to prove it. Elena found the complaints buried in HR files that should have been flagged for senior management review. So I could have been protected, Lena said, anger sharpening her voice. If they'd actually done their jobs, Harlow would have been fired years ago, and none of this would have happened. Exactly, Margaret said. Which is why a civil suit isn't just about compensation for you. It's about systemic change. We sue for damages, yes, but we also sue for injunctive relief requiring the company to implement actual protections for employees. Training, oversight, clear reporting procedures that can't be buried by middle management. How much are we talking about? Lena asked. In damages? Margaret considered. Given the documented pattern of abuse, the emotional distress, the impact on your career and education, and the company's negligence, I'd estimate between 2 and 5 million if we go to trial and win. Probably less if they settle, but settlement would also include the policy changes we demand. Lena stared at her. Million? As in millions of dollars? Yes, you suffered severe trauma because a company chose profit over safety. That has a price. I can't. Lena shook her head, overwhelmed. I just wanted him to stop hurting people. I didn't think about... Take a breath, Damien said gently. You don't have to decide anything today. Margaret is just explaining your options. Lena took several shaky breaths, visibly trying to process. If I sued, how long would it take? Civil cases move slower than criminal, Margaret explained. Probably 18 months to 2 years before trial, assuming they don't settle earlier. During that time, you'd have to sit for depositions, answer interrogatories, potentially face Harlow and his lawyers in court. More testimony, more reliving it. I'm afraid so, though I can make the process as painless as possible. Margaret's expression softened. Ms. Hart, I know this is a lot to absorb, but I want you to understand something. What happened to you wasn't your fault, and you deserve compensation for the harm you suffered, not as charity, but as justice. Companies like this need to learn that protecting predators costs them more than protecting victims. Can I think about it? Lena asked. Of course. Take all the time you need. Margaret handed her a folder. This has information about the process, potential timelines, and my contact information. When you're ready to talk, I'm here. Outside the office, Lena stood on the sidewalk looking lost. I don't know what to do. The criminal case feels necessary, stopping Harlow, making sure he faces consequences. But suing for money feels like I'm profiting from my own trauma. You're not profiting, Damien said. You're being compensated for damages you actually suffered, medical costs, therapy, lost wages from the time you couldn't work, educational opportunities you missed because you were too traumatized to focus. That's not profit, that's restoration. But millions of dollars is what it costs to make a company care about fixing their broken system. A few thousand? They write that off as the cost of doing business. A few million? That gets board-level attention and actual policy changes. Damien guided her toward his car, away from a reporter who'd spotted them. But you don't have to decide now. Focus on the criminal case. The civil suit can wait. Lena was quiet during the drive back to Tyler's dorm. When they arrived, she didn't immediately get out of the car. Morrison called this morning, she said quietly. Trial date set for March. 4 months away. How do you feel about that? Terrified, relieved, angry, all of it at once. Lena stared at her hands. She said, Harlow's lawyers are going to try to make me look unstable. They'll bring up that I stayed for 6 months, that I didn't report him earlier, that I documented everything in a journal like I was planning this. They'll try, Damien agreed. But Morrison will be ready, and you'll have support. The other victims testifying, character witnesses, expert testimony about trauma responses. You're not going into that courtroom alone. What if I fall apart on the stand? What if I can't answer their questions without crying or freezing up? Then you cry or freeze up, and the jury sees a traumatized woman trying to tell the truth about something horrible. That's not weakness, Lena. That's humanity. Damien turned to face her. But between now and March, you're going to prepare. Morrison will do practice examinations, teach you how to handle hostile cross-examination. By the time you walk into that courtroom, You'll know every question they might ask and have answers ready. Will you be there at the trial? If you want me there, yes. Lena nodded slowly. I think I do. You've been there for everything else. It feels right that you'd be there for the end. She got out of the car, then paused. Damien, thank you for not pushing me about the civil suit. Margaret made good points, but I need time to think about whether I'm strong enough for 2 legal battles. You're stronger than you think, Damien said, but strength also means knowing your limits and respecting them. Whatever you decide, I'll support it. He watched her walk into the building, shoulders squared despite her exhaustion, and felt that unfamiliar sensation again, pride, mixed with protectiveness, mixed with something else he wasn't ready to name. The next 2 weeks passed in a blur of legal preparation and media management. Morrison's office released detailed charging documents that laid out the case against Harlow with devastating precision. The 5 victim testimonies created an undeniable pattern spanning 8 years. Financial records proved Harlow had manipulated Tyler's legal situation. Security footage showed his escalating aggression toward Lena. The defense countered by attacking the victim's credibility, suggesting they'd coordinated their stories, implying financial motivation. Walsh gave interviews painting Harlow as a demanding boss being persecuted by disgruntled employees. But cracks were forming in Harlow's carefully constructed defense. 2 former colleagues came forward voluntarily, confirming they'd witnessed Harlow's inappropriate behavior and been pressured by management to keep quiet. An audit of the property management company's HR practices revealed systematic suppression of harassment complaints. And then, Deputy Mayor Chen made a fatal mistake. During a campaign appearance, a reporter asked about his brother-in-law's case. Chen, rattled and defensive, said something he shouldn't have. I've reviewed Grant's personnel file myself, and there's nothing in his record that suggests the kind of behavior these women are alleging. The problem was that personnel files were confidential. Chen, as deputy mayor, had no legal authority to access them. And by admitting he'd reviewed Harlow's file, he'd essentially confessed to using his position to gather information for a family member's criminal defense. Morrison pounced. Within 48 hours, she'd filed a motion requesting an investigation into whether Chen had inappropriately accessed confidential documents or influenced the case. The media explosion was immediate and catastrophic. Damien watched Chen's career implode in real time, news coverage shifting from sympathetic family member caught in scandal to damning politician abuses power to protect abuser. Ethics complaints were filed. Calls for resignation echoed through City Hall. Chen's political allies distanced themselves with practiced efficiency. He's done, Elena said, watching the evening news. Even if he avoids criminal charges, his political career is over. He won't survive the ethics investigation. Good, Damien said without sympathy. He enabled Harlow for years. He deserves whatever he gets. His phone rang. Morrison. You're watching the news? She asked. Hard to miss it. Chen's attorney just called. They want to cooperate with our investigation in exchange for immunity. Turns out the deputy mayor has been very busy protecting his brother-in-law, suppressed at least 4 complaints, pressured 2 women into accepting settlements, used city resources to dig up dirt on potential witnesses. Can you use that in the criminal case against Harlow? Absolutely. It proves Harlow had high-level protection enabling his behavior. Makes him look even worse. He wasn't just a predator, he was a connected predator who thought he was untouchable. Morrison's voice held grim satisfaction. Harlow's lawyers are going to regret this. They thought Chen's connections were an asset. Turns out they're a liability. What about Lena? How's she handling all this attention? Better than expected, honestly. She's been doing practice testimony sessions, and she's strong, focused, angry in a productive way. Morrison paused. She's also made a decision about the civil suit. She's going forward with it. Damien felt surprise mixed with pride. When did she decide? This morning. She said watching Chen fall apart made her realize that accountability has to be complete. Criminal charges punish Harlow, but the civil suit fixes the system that enabled him. She wants both. That's going to be hard on her. She knows. But she also knows she has support. Your team, my office, the other victims, her brother, she's not alone anymore. That makes all the difference.
After hanging up, Damien sat in his office thinking about Lena's journey from the terrified woman hiding bruises behind long sleeves to someone strong enough to pursue complete accountability. It had been less than a month since that first conversation in the coffee shop, but she'd transformed herself from victim to survivor to fighter. His phone buzzed with a text from her. "Can we talk?" "Not about the case, just talk. I need normal conversation with someone who knows everything but won't treat me like I'm broken." Damien smiled and called her immediately. "What do you want to talk about?" "Anything but lawyers and testimony and Grant Harlow," Lena said, exhaustion evident in her voice. "Tell me about you. I've spent a month letting you help me, but I don't actually know anything about you except that you're good at destroying people who deserve it." That's a surprisingly accurate summary of my skill set," Damien said dryly. Lena laughed, the sound genuine and warm. "See? That's what I need. Humor, normalcy. Remind me that the world is bigger than courtrooms and depositions." They talked for 2 hours about nothing important. Books they'd read, places they'd traveled, childhood memories that had nothing to do with trauma or justice. Lena told him about wanting to work in nonprofit management, about the programs she'd dreamed of creating to help people who fell through society's cracks. "That's what I was working toward before everything happened," she said. "I was saving money to go back for my master's degree in public policy. Wanted to build systems that actually helped people instead of just processing them." "You still can," Damien said. "When this is over, when you have the settlement money, you could finish your degree and start your own organization. Do it right from the beginning." "Maybe." Well, Lena was quiet for a moment. "Damien, what are you going to do? After the trial, after everything's resolved? Do you just go back to whatever you were doing before you met me?" It was a good question. Damien had been asking himself the same thing. A month ago, his world had been clear and uncomplicated. Build power, protect interests, eliminate threats. But helping Lena had reminded him that power could be used for something other than self-interest, that there was satisfaction in fighting for someone who couldn't fight alone. "Honestly, I don't know," he admitted. "This has been different, important in a way my usual work isn't. Makes me wonder if I should be doing more of it. Helping people? Helping people who deserve it but don't have the resources to help themselves. There are a lot of Lenas out there, people trapped in bad situations by predators with power and protection. Maybe I should start evening the odds more often." "That sounds like a purpose," Lena said softly, "like something worth building toward." "Maybe it is." They talked until Lena's voice started fading with exhaustion, and Damien insisted she get some sleep. After hanging up, he sat in the quiet of his office, Elena's earlier words echoing in his mind about boundaries and gratitude and emotional involvement. She wasn't wrong to warn him. There was something developing between him and Lena that went beyond professional support. But it wasn't romance, not exactly. It was recognition. Two people who'd both been shaped by power dynamics, who understood what it meant to survive in systems designed to crush you, who'd chosen to fight back in their own ways. When this was over, Lena would move on to build the life she'd always wanted, and Damien would return to his world, changed in ways he was only beginning to understand. But right now they both had work to do, a trial to win, a predator to destroy, a system to fix. And somewhere in the middle of all that, two people were learning that justice wasn't just about punishment, it was about proving that the invisible could become visible, that the powerless could reclaim power, and that sometimes the most meaningful victories were the ones that gave someone else the tools to save themselves. The trial was 4 months away, but the real battle had already been won. Lena Hart had decided she was worth fighting for. Everything else was just details. March arrived with unseasonable warmth, the kind of false spring that made people forget winter wasn't quite finished. The trial was scheduled to begin on a Monday, and by Friday afternoon, Damien could feel the tension radiating through everyone involved in the case. Morrison's office had transformed into a war room, walls covered with timeline charts and witness lists and evidence photographs that told the story of Grant Harlow's systematic destruction of women's lives. The prosecutor herself looked tired but grimly satisfied, like a general who'd spent months preparing for a battle she knew she could win. "We're ready," she told Damien during their final strategy meeting. "Harlow's team is going to throw everything at us. Character assassination, conspiracy theories, suggestions that all 5 women coordinated false accusations for financial gain.
But we've got documentation they can't refute. Security footage, medical records, financial trails proving Harlow manufactured Tyler's legal crisis. And most importantly, we've got Lena. How is she? Damien asked. Stronger than I expected. We did a final practice session yesterday, put her through the worst cross-examination questions Walsh could possibly ask. She didn't break. Got emotional in places, which is good. Juries need to see the human impact. But she stayed coherent, stayed focused on the facts. Morrison pulled up her notes. The other victims are solid too. When the jury hears 5 different women describing the same pattern of behavior, isolation, manipulation, escalation, threats, it's going to be impossible to dismiss as coincidence. What about Chen's cooperation? Is that helping? Enormously. His testimony about suppressing complaints and using city resources to protect Harlow demonstrates consciousness of guilt. If Harlow was innocent, why would his brother-in-law need to work so hard to bury evidence? Morrison smiled grimly. Chen's political career is over, but his cooperation might keep him out of prison, and it's going to put Harlow away for years. Damien nodded, satisfied. When do you need me there? Opening statements are Monday at 9, but Damien, Morrison's expression turned serious. You should know that Harlow's team is aware of your involvement. They're going to try to paint you as some kind of puppet master who manipulated Lena into making false accusations. Walsh might even try to get you called as a witness. Let him try. I documented everything legally. There's nothing to hide. I know. I just want you prepared for the attention. This case is already high profile because of Chen's connection. Add in a mysterious benefactor helping the victim, and the media's going to go crazy. I can handle media attention, Damien said quietly, as long as it doesn't hurt Lena. It shouldn't. If anything, having someone in her corner makes her more sympathetic. Shows she's not some gold digger working an angle. She's someone people believed enough to help. Morrison gathered her files. Get some rest this weekend. Monday's going to be intense. Damien spent Saturday preparing in his own way, reviewing every piece of evidence his team had compiled, looking for weaknesses in the case that Walsh might exploit. He found none that weren't already accounted for, but the exercise was calming. Control through preparation, certainty through knowledge, these were tools he understood. Sunday afternoon, Lena called. I can't sleep, she said without preamble. I've been trying for 3 days and I just lie there thinking about tomorrow, about sitting in that courtroom and seeing him again. Want to get coffee? Damien offered. Might help to talk it through. They met at the same coffee shop where this had all started, the circle completing itself in a way that felt intentional. Lena looked exhausted, dressed in comfortable clothes that suggested she'd given up on appearances for the weekend. Morrison says I'm ready, she said, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup. Tyler says I'm strong enough. My therapist says I've done all the work I can do, but I still feel like I'm going to walk into that courtroom and fall apart. You might, Damien said honestly. And that would be okay. You're testifying about trauma, Lena. No one expects you to be emotionless. But what if I can't answer Walsh's questions? What if I freeze up or contradict myself or... Then Morrison will redirect, remind you that trauma affects memory, and the jury will see a real person struggling to tell a difficult truth. That's more believable than someone who has every detail perfectly memorized. Damien leaned forward. Lena, you're going to testify about 6 months of systematic abuse. No one, not the jury, not the judge, not even Walsh, expects that to be easy or clean. They expect it to hurt, and when they see how much it hurts, they're going to believe you. Lena was quiet for a long moment. What if we lose? It was the fear she'd been dancing around for weeks. Damien had known it was coming. If you lose the criminal case, you still have the civil suit. If you lose both, you still walked into court and told the truth about what happened to you. You still stopped hiding, stopped being invisible, stopped letting fear control your life. He held her gaze. Winning in court would be justice. But you've already won the more important battle. You got your power back. No verdict can take that away. That's very philosophical for someone who probably hasn't lost many fights, Lena said, a hint of humor breaking through the anxiety. I've lost plenty. I just learned to redefine victory so the losses hurt less. Damien smiled slightly. But for what it's worth, I
I don't think you're going to lose.
Morrison's too good, the evidence is too strong, and you're too credible. Harlow's going to prison, and everyone's going to know exactly what kind of monster he is.
I want that, Lena said quietly. I want everyone to know. I want the next woman who works in that building to hear the story and understand she doesn't have to accept abuse as the price of employment. I want other victims to see that fighting back is possible. That's worth whatever happens tomorrow. Then you're already exactly where you need to be, Damien said. Ready? No, but I'm doing it anyway. Monday morning broke clear and cold, winter reasserting itself after the weekend's false warmth. Damien arrived at the courthouse early, finding a spot in the gallery where he could see everything without being obvious. The courtroom filled quickly, journalists, legal observers, representatives from women's advocacy groups, and a scattering of people who just wanted to witness justice being served.
Lena entered with Morrison, dressed in a simple navy suit that made her look professional and vulnerable at the same time. Her eyes found Damien's across the crowded room, and he gave her a small nod of encouragement. Then Grant Harlow walked in, flanked by his legal team, and the temperature in the room seemed to drop. He looked different from the confident building manager Damien had first observed. Thinner, harder, with the desperate edge of someone fighting for survival. His suit was expensive, his posture carefully controlled, but there was rage simmering beneath the surface that no amount of professional coaching could completely hide. When his eyes swept the gallery and landed on Lena, the hatred was unmistakable. She flinched just slightly before catching herself and lifting her chin. The judge entered, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s named Margaret Torres, who had a reputation for running tight trials and tolerating zero theatrics. She reviewed the charges with clinical precision: assault, coercion, stalking, witness intimidation, each count carrying significant prison time. The prosecution may make their opening statement, Judge Torres said. Morrison stood, and Damien could see why she'd built such a formidable reputation. She didn't grandstand or perform. She simply told Lena's story with devastating clarity, walking the jury through 6 months of systematic abuse documented in medical records, security footage, and Lena's own contemporaneous journal entries. The defense is going to tell you this was a consensual relationship between adults, Morrison said. They're going to suggest these women are lying, coordinating stories, seeking money and attention. But I'm going to show you evidence that tells a different story. A story of a man who used his power to trap vulnerable women, who manufactured crises to create dependence, who escalated from manipulation to violence when his control was threatened. And when you've heard all the evidence, you're going to understand that Grant Harlow isn't a victim of false accusations. He's a predator who finally got caught. Walsh's opening was predictably aggressive. He painted Harlow as a demanding but fair manager who'd been targeted by disgruntled employees upset about workplace criticism. He suggested Lena had pursued a relationship with Harlow, hoping for career advancement, then fabricated abuse claims when she didn't get promoted. He called the coordination between victims suspicious, implied financial motivation, and promised to show the jury the truth behind these carefully constructed lies. It was effective courtroom theater, Damien had to admit. If you didn't know the evidence, you might actually believe it. But then Morrison called her first witness. The medical examiner who'd photographed Lena's injuries testified about bruising patterns consistent with being grabbed, pushed, restrained. The security expert who'd reviewed the building's camera footage walked the jury through timestamps showing Lena entering Harlow's office and emerging visibly distressed. The forensic accountant explained how money had flowed from Harlow's accounts to the legal trust that paid Tyler's attorney fees. Each witness added another brick to the foundation of Morrison's case until the pattern was undeniable. On the third day, Morrison called Lena to the stand. Damien watched her walk to the witness box with her spine straight and her hands steady, and felt something fierce and protective surge in his chest. This was it, the moment everything had been building toward. Morrison started gently, establishing basic facts. Where Lena worked, how long she'd been there, her professional background and aspirations. Then, carefully, she walked Lena through meeting Harlow, Tyler's arrest, the moment Harlow had revealed his involvement in Tyler's legal defense. "What did Harlow say to you when he told you about helping Tyler?" Morrison asked. Lena's voice was quiet but clear. He said Tyler's freedom was a gift from him, that gifts came with expectations, that I owed him loyalty and discretion in exchange for his continued support of my family. Did you understand what he meant by loyalty and discretion? At first, no. I thought he just meant I should be a good employee, not gossip about him. But then he started asking me to do things that weren't part of my job. Personal errands, staying late, coming in early. When I hesitated, he'd remind me about Tyler, about how fragile probation was. Morrison guided her through the escalation with careful precision. The inappropriate comments, the unwanted touching, the first time Harlow had grabbed her hard enough to leave bruises, the isolation from coworkers, the constant monitoring, the growing fear that had consumed her life. "Why didn't you report this behavior earlier?" Morrison asked, getting ahead of the question Walsh would definitely ask. "Because I was terrified," Lena said simply. "Harlow told me he had connections, that no one would believe me, that if I caused problems, Tyler would go to prison. He made me feel like I had no options except to endure it and hope it didn't get worse." "But it did get worse." "Yes." Lena's voice wavered slightly. "The last time I saw him before I took leave, he called me to his office. He was angry about something, I don't even remember what. He grabbed me, pushed me against the wall, put his hand around my throat. And he told me I needed to understand who was in charge, that I belonged to him, and that I should stop fighting because it was only going to get harder." "What did you do after that incident?" "I went home and cried. Then I started documenting everything in detail because I realized this wasn't going to stop, that eventually he was going to seriously hurt me or worse. I didn't know what to do with the documentation, but I knew I needed proof that this was happening." Morrison let that sit with the jury for a moment. "Did there come a time when you received help?" "Yes. A security consultant named David Stern," Lena's eyes found Damien's in the gallery, "who I later learned was Damien Valenti, noticed something was wrong. He approached me, told me he'd been documenting Harlow's behavior, and offered to help me build a case. For the first time in 6 months, someone saw what was happening to me and believed it was wrong." Morrison walked her through the decision to come forward, the meeting with the DA's office, the terror of breaking free from Harlow's control. Then she yielded to Walsh for cross-examination. Damien had expected Walsh to be aggressive, but the attorney exceeded expectations. He attacked Lena's credibility with surgical precision, suggesting she'd fabricated the journal entries after meeting Damien, implying she'd stayed in the situation voluntarily because she hoped for career advancement, questioning why she hadn't gone to police immediately after the first incident of violence. "Isn't it true, Ms. Hart, that you never once told anyone at the Hartwell Tower that you felt unsafe or threatened by Mr. Harlow?" Walsh asked. "I couldn't," Lena said, her voice shaking slightly. "Harlow controlled everything. He had access to all my communications, knew my schedule, monitored who I talked to. Telling someone meant risking Tyler's freedom. Or perhaps you didn't tell anyone because nothing inappropriate was happening, and you only decided to make these accusations after Mr. Valente offered you money and resources to destroy my client's reputation." "Objection," Morrison said sharply. "Mischaracterizes the witness's testimony and assumes facts not in evidence." "Sustained," Judge Torres said. "Mr. Walsh, rephrase." Walsh smiled thinly. "Ms. Hart, did Mr. Valente offer you financial support in exchange for your cooperation with this prosecution?" "He offered me help," Lena said firmly. "He didn't ask for anything in return. He just gave me tools to do what I should have been able to do on my own, tell the truth about what happened to me." How convenient that a wealthy, powerful man appeared just when you needed help, almost like it was planned. "It wasn't planned," Lena said, and now Damien could hear steel in her voice. "I was trying to survive. Damien saw someone being hurt and decided to help. That's not a conspiracy. That's basic human decency, which apparently your client doesn't understand." "Objection, Your Honor." "Ms. Hart, please just answer the questions asked," Judge Torres said, but there was a hint of approval in her tone. Walsh tried several more angles, but Lena held firm. When he suggested she'd coordinated her story with the other victims, she pointed out that she'd never met any of them until after going to the DA. When he implied financial motivation, she calmly explained that she'd taken every legal step possible to avoid this becoming public before Harlow's own behavior forced the confrontation. By the time Walsh finished, he'd failed to shake her testimony, and Lena looked exhausted but unbroken. The other 4 victims testified over the next 3 days, each one telling a story that echoed Lena's with heartbreaking consistency. Different details, different timelines, but the same pattern: isolation, manipulation, escalation, fear. Walsh attacked each of them with the same aggressive tactics, and each time he failed to create the reasonable doubt he needed. On day 8, Morrison called Deputy Mayor Richard Chen. Chen looked like a man who'd aged a decade in 3 months. His political career was already over, destroyed by his decision to protect his brother-in-law instead of doing the right thing. Now he was testifying in exchange for immunity, laying out exactly how he'd used his position to suppress complaints and intimidate victims. "I made calls to HR departments," Chen admitted, his voice flat. "Suggested it would be better for everyone if certain complaints went away quietly. I facilitated settlements with NDAs. I used city resources to investigate women who'd filed reports, looking for anything that might discredit them." He looked directly at the jury. "I knew Grant was a problem. I knew he was hurting people. And I chose to protect him because he was family. That was wrong." Walsh tried to minimize Chen's testimony during cross, but the damage was done. The jury had heard a former deputy mayor admit to corruption and obstruction to protect a predator. Morrison rested her case on day 9, and Walsh immediately moved for dismissal, arguing the prosecution hadn't met its burden. Judge Torres denied the motion without hesitation, and the defense began presenting its case. It was weak. Character witnesses who testified Harlow was a good manager couldn't explain the documented pattern of abuse. Expert witnesses who tried to discredit the medical evidence got shredded by Morrison's counter-examination. Harlow himself never took the stand. Walsh was too smart to put his client's temper and arrogance in front of the jury. Closing arguments came on day 12. Morrison summarized the evidence with devastating efficiency, walking the jury through each count and the specific evidence that supported it. Walsh gave it one last try, arguing reasonable doubt and questioning the victim's motivations, but even he seemed to know it was over. The jury deliberated for 6 hours. Damien sat in the gallery with Lena, Elena, and Marco, waiting. Tyler had joined them, holding his sister's hand and looking older than his 23 years. The other victims were scattered through the courtroom, a small community bound by shared trauma and the hope for justice. When the bailiff announced the jury had reached a verdict, the tension in the room became almost unbearable. Judge Torres took her seat. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" "We have, Your Honor," the forewoman said. "On the count of assault in the 2nd degree, how do you find?" "Guilty." Lena's hand tightened on Tyler's. Damien could see her fighting to keep her composure. "On the count of coercion in the 1st degree?" "Guilty." "On the count of stalking in the 1st degree?" "Guilty." Every count came back the same. Guilty, guilty, guilty. 9 counts total, each one representing a choice Harlow had made to hurt someone vulnerable, each one now validated by 12 people who'd heard the evidence and believed the victims. When the final count was read, Harlow's careful control shattered. He started shouting about injustice and conspiracies until Judge Torres ordered him removed from the courtroom. Walsh tried to maintain professional composure, but even he looked defeated. In the gallery, Lena was crying silently, Tyler's arm around her shoulders. The other victims were hugging, supporting each other, letting years of fear and anger and pain transform into relief. Judge Torres set sentencing for 6 weeks out, thanked the jury for their service, and dismissed court. Morrison approached Lena immediately. "You did it. We did it. He's going to prison for years." "How many years to?" Tyler asked. "With his record and the severity of the offenses? I'd estimate 15 to 20. He'll be an old man when he gets out, if he survives that long. Men who hurt women don't do well in prison." Lena stood on shaking legs, looking around the courtroom like she was seeing it for the first time. Then her eyes found Damien's. "Can we get out of here?" she asked. "I need air." They left through a side entrance to avoid the media scrum, emerging into late afternoon sunshine that felt like a benediction. Lena took a deep breath, then another, like someone who'd been holding their breath for months and could finally exhale. "It's over," she said wonderingly. "It's actually over." "The criminal case is," Damien agreed. "Civil suit starts in 3 months." I know, but this was the important one. This was about proving he did what he did, that I wasn't lying or crazy or vindictive. And we proved it. Lena turned to face him. Thank you for everything. For seeing me when I was invisible. For giving me the tools to fight back. For being there through all of this. You don't need to thank me, Damien said. You did the hard work. You testified. You stood up. You refused to back down even when Walsh tried to destroy you. That was all you. But I couldn't have done it alone. And I didn't have to because you decided I was worth helping. Lena smiled through tears. That matters. More than you probably realize. Tyler cleared his throat. I'm going to give you 2 a minute. I need to call Mom's friend, let her know how it went. He walked a discreet distance away, phone already at his ear. Elena and Marco exchanged glances and also retreated, leaving Damien and Lena alone on the courthouse steps. What happens now? Lena asked. For you, I mean. Do you go back to your regular life and forget about the receptionist you helped? I could never forget you, Damien said honestly. And I don't think I want to go back to exactly what I was doing before. This has been different, important. Makes me want to do more of it. Helping people? Helping people who deserve it but don't have resources to help themselves. There are a lot of Grant Harlows in the world. Maybe I should start evening the odds more systematically. Lena studied his face. That sounds like a calling. Maybe it is. What about you? What happens now? I finish the civil suit, make the property management company implement real protections for workers. Use the settlement money to get my master's degree. Start the nonprofit I've been dreaming about. Lena's voice grew stronger as she spoke. Build something that helps invisible people become visible. Create systems that actually protect the vulnerable instead of the powerful. That's a good plan. It's your plan too, kind of, just from a different angle. Lena hesitated, then asked the question Damien had been expecting. Will I see you again after everything's resolved? It was complicated. They existed in such different worlds, her life moving toward legitimacy and purpose, his still rooted in the shadows where power operated outside official channels. But they'd also seen each other at their most essential, stripped of pretense, fighting for something that mattered. I don't know, Damien admitted. Part of me wants to stay in your life, see what you build, be part of something good and clean and meaningful. But another part thinks you deserve a fresh start without reminders of the worst 6 months of your life. You're not a reminder of the worst 6 months, Lena said firmly. You're a reminder that good people exist. That power can be used to protect instead of harm, that fighting back is possible. She stepped closer. So yes, I want you in my life. As a friend, as someone I can call when I need perspective, as a reminder of what I survived and what I'm capable of. If you want that too. I do, Damien said. But Lena, I need you to understand. My world is complicated. The things I do, the people I work with, the methods I use, they're not always clean or legal. I don't want to compromise what you're building. Then we'll be careful. We'll keep appropriate boundaries. But we'll also remember that we fought this battle together, and that means something. Lena held out her hand. Friends? Damien took her hand, felt the strength in her grip, and smiled. Friends. Tyler rejoined them, followed by Elena and Marco and the small group of people who'd become Lena's support system through the trial. They stood together on the courthouse steps, strangers bound by shared purpose, celebrating a victory that meant different things to each of them, but mattered to all. 6 weeks later, Grant Harlow was sentenced to 18 years in prison without possibility of early parole. The property management company settled Lena's civil suit for $4.2 million and agreed to implement comprehensive harassment prevention programs across all their properties. Deputy Mayor Chen resigned and pleaded guilty to obstruction charges that would likely mean probation, but the permanent end of his political career. And Lena Hart enrolled in a master's program in nonprofit management, starting work on an organization that would eventually help hundreds of workers escape abusive employment situations and hold companies accountable for protecting predators. Damien watched from a distance as she rebuilt her life, occasionally meeting for coffee to discuss cases where his resources might help someone in need. He'd quietly shifted some of his organization's focus toward identifying and dismantling systems that enabled abuse, finding satisfaction in using his power for something beyond profit and control. 2 years after the trial, Lena's organization held its first annual gala, celebrating a year of helping vulnerable workers and forcing policy changes at dozens of companies. Damien attended, watching her give a speech about invisibility and empowerment that left half the audience in tears. Afterward, she found him at the bar. "Thank you for coming," she said, looking radiant in a dress that spoke of confidence earned through survival. "Wouldn't have missed it. You've built something remarkable." "We've built something remarkable," Lena corrected. "The initial funding came from my settlement, but the infrastructure came from your team's expertise. The legal frameworks came from Morrison's advice. The support systems came from the other survivors who decided to turn their pain into purpose." She gestured around the room. "This isn't mine. It's ours. All of us deciding that what happened to us could become something that helped others." Damien raised his glass. "To turning pain into purpose." "And to people who see the invisible," Lena added, clinking her glass against his, "even when it's easier to look away." They stood together watching the celebration, two people whose lives had intersected at a moment of crisis and diverged into different forms of justice. Lena would build systems that protected people before they got hurt. Damien would dismantle systems that enabled predators after the damage was done. Different approaches, same goal, making sure the Grant Harlows of the world learned that power had limits and consequences. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Tyler approached them, now a college graduate working as a counselor for at-risk youth. "Lena, they need you for final thank you speeches," he said. Then he turned to Damien, extending his hand. "I never properly thanked you for everything you did for my sister, for clearing my record, for giving us both a second chance." "You earned that second chance," Damien said, shaking his hand. "Both of you did. I just made sure you got the opportunity." Tyler nodded, understanding more than Damien had said. Then he led Lena back to the small stage where the evening speakers were gathering. Damien watched her take the microphone one last time, thanking supporters and staff and survivors who'd trusted her with their stories. She spoke about the work still ahead, the systems still broken, the people still invisible who needed advocates willing to see them. "2 years ago, I was one of those invisible people," Lena said, her voice carrying through the room. "I thought my only option was to endure abuse and hope I survived it. But someone saw me anyway. Saw me flinch in a lobby, saw bruises I tried to hide, saw fear I couldn't completely conceal. And instead of looking away, instead of deciding it wasn't their problem, they decided I was worth helping." Her eyes found Damien's across the crowded room. "That decision changed my life. It gave me back my power, my dignity, my future. And it taught me that the most important thing we can do for each other is refuse to look away when someone needs help. Refuse to accept invisibility as inevitable. Refuse to let fear win." The room erupted in applause, and Damien felt something unfamiliar, pride mixed with humility, mixed with the bone-deep satisfaction of knowing he'd done something that mattered beyond profit or power. When the gala ended and the last guest departed, Damien found Lena outside looking up at the stars barely visible through city light pollution. "Successful evening," he observed. "Beyond my wildest expectations. We raised enough to expand to 3 more cities, hire 5 new advocates, and launch the legal clinic we've been planning." Lena smiled. "People want to help. They just need to know how. You're teaching them." "We're teaching them," Lena corrected again. "This doesn't work without people like you willing to use power for good, instead of just for profit." Damien was quiet for a moment. "I've been thinking about what you said, about invisibility and advocacy. I want to formalize what we've been doing informally, create a fund that helps people in situations like yours. Legal support, security, resources to fight back against predators who think they're untouchable." Lena turned to face him fully. "That's a significant commitment. So is what you've built. And you're right. There are a lot of people out there who need help and have no idea where to find it. Maybe it's time to make sure they can find us." "Partners, then?" Lena asked. "Your resources and connections, my organizational structure and frontline experience?" "Partners," Damien agreed. They shook hands, sealing an alliance that would eventually help hundreds of people escape situations that had seemed hopeless. 2 people who'd started as stranger and victim evolved into allies and emerged as friends bound by shared purpose. Years later, when asked about the origins of the Valente Heart Foundation, Lena would always tell the same story, about a man who noticed a woman flinching in a lobby and decided her fear mattered more than his convenience, about the choice to see the invisible, to believe the unbelievable, to fight battles that weren't his own because they were the right battles to fight. And Damien, when asked why he'd shifted his entire organization's focus toward helping abuse victims, would say simply that Lena Hart had reminded him what power was actually for. Not to control others, but to give the powerless tools to reclaim their own strength. Not to build empires, but to tear down the systems that enabled predators. Grant Harlow served 16 years before dying of a heart attack in prison, unmourned and unremembered except as a cautionary tale about what happened when predators finally faced consequences. Deputy Mayor Chen never returned to politics, spending his remaining years doing quiet advocacy work that he hoped might balance the harm he'd enabled. The property management company implemented some of the strongest anti-harassment protections in the industry, and several other companies followed their example after seeing the financial and reputational cost of enabling abuse. And Lena Hart, who'd once been invisible except when someone wanted to hurt her, became one of the most visible advocates for workplace safety in the country. She testified before Congress, consulted on legislation, and personally helped more than 800 people escape situations they'd thought were inescapable. But she never forgot where it started. In a marble lobby, with a bruise she tried to hide, and a stranger who decided to look anyway, who saw fear and chose to do something about it, who proved that the most powerful thing anyone can do is refuse to accept that some people are invisible, some suffering is inevitable, and some predators are untouchable. Because in the end, the real victory wasn't Grant Harlow's conviction or the settlement money or even the foundation that helped so many people. The real victory was a terrified woman deciding she was worth fighting for, finding the courage to fight back, and discovering that she'd been strong enough all along. She just needed someone to remind her. The invisible had become visible. The powerless had reclaimed power, and fear, which had controlled so much for so long, had finally lost. That was justice, complete and permanent, and exactly what everyone involved had fought for. And it had all started with one simple choice: to see someone who needed help and help them. Everything else was just details.